Chapter 181. Look behind you. Kyle toyed with the transponder snail, his fingertips tapping lightly against the receiver, producing soft rhythmic clicks. On the other end, Morgans held his breath, waiting for the final verdict. Rumble Rumble Fruit, CP0, the 7 Warlords of the Sea, and Buggy. Kyle murmured slowly, as if cataloging items on a shelf. All right, these tidbits are mildly interesting. I'll let you off this time. Thank you for your magnanimity, Lord Kyle. Your wisdom is broader than the sky, your benevolence deeper than the ocean. Morgan's voice through the transponder snail climbed into an overly eager, almost weepy pitch. Still, his face betrayed him, tight with resentment, and his lips moved in silent, profane curses at the receiver. The flattery was familiar. Kyle barely reacted as Morgans continued, laying it on thick. Your guidance is like the North Star to us, you. Enough. Kyle cut him off. Stop reciting. Yes. Morgans shut up immediately. Kyle drained his black tea and set the cup down with a crisp clink. He shifted into a more comfortable position and drawled, however little more, you have a flaw. From the other end of the line, he could almost hear a heartbeat. One face to your front, another to your back, Kyle continued. What are you saying, Lord Kyle? Morgans's voice snapped. My admiration for you is witnessed by the sun and moon. Is that so? Kyle chuckled softly. Then why don't you look behind you? A dead silence fell on the line. Kyle didn't hurry. He simply waited. Beside him, Karen stayed perfectly still, like a loyal statue. After a few seconds, a strangled scream burst out of the transponder snail, as if someone's throat had been suddenly squeezed. Miles away, in a corner of the world, inside the president's office at the World Economic Journal, Morgans craned his stiff neck. The obsequious relief that had been on his face snapped away and was replaced by pure terror. Perched on the bookshelf behind his desk was a raven, entirely black and as if formed from shadow itself, watching him in silence. It made no sound and gave no movement, only those 2 eerie blue eyes, unblinking, as if it had been watching him for a very, very long time. The vision was shared. How that happened? Ask Mariah about his I think, therefore I am power. Morgans understood everything in an instant. Cold sweat seeped through the feathers beneath his wings. Lord Kyle, this is... He tried to laugh it off, but his voice trembled. Just a lost little bird. Kyle's voice drifted from the transponder snail, the casual playfulness in it impossible to ignore. It says it really likes your office and wants to stay a bit longer. Likes it? That's wonderful. Most welcome. Morgans plastered on an enthusiastic, almost grotesque smile for the shadow raven. How do you find my office? Need me to redecorate? Retro or minimalist modern? No need. The levity vanished from Kyle's voice. It went cold. Mind your mouth and mind your pen. If I see Strongest Marriage Alliance in the paper again, I'll have Mariah cut off your shadow and stuff it into Big Mom's wedding cake, and my hawk will mince what's left of you. Never again, Morgans blurted, the words coming out more like a plea than a promise. Never again, Morgans wailed, nodding frantically at the transponder snail as his top hat flew off. Kyle paid the terrified man no heed and calmly ended the call. The transponder snail copied Morgans's horrified expression, then slumped motionless on the table. Silence settled over the office. Kyle propped his feet on the edge of the desk as his chair began to spin again, faster this time, as if it might turn into a black tornado. Karen stepped forward without a sound, snatched the empty teacup, and set a fresh one in its place. He watched his lord's eccentric stress relief with growing admiration. To emulate the tidal forces of celestial bodies by spinning at high speed, thereby recalibrating one's biomagnetic field until it resonates with the world, what a sublime, unfathomable method of cultivation. Kyle, of course, had no idea what his overly imaginative butler was thinking. He was simply sorting the information he'd just received, and for some reason, enjoying the hollow, dizzy calm the spinning brought. The 7 Warlords of the Sea. Hancock was one of his, and Doflamingo was his most loyal dog. In effect, the world government was paying 2 moles to help him hold his turf, a thought that made him smile. Crocodile could be left to make trouble in Alabasta. Perfect warm-up material for a certain straw-hatted kid down the line, and if Kyle had time, he might swing by and watch the fun. Then there was Buggy. Thinking of that red-nosed clown, Kyle's lips twitched. 55 million berries. Well done, Buggy. He hadn't ended up like in the old tale, rotting away on a ramshackle ship with nobodies and pulling petty robberies. By a bizarre twist of fate, riding on luck and a famous name, Buggy had beaten veteran pirates and won the people's admiration, exactly the kind of notoriety a member of a future Pirate King's crew should have. The path had been ridiculously farcical, but the result was perfect. How Shoku luck had kicked in, Kyle decided, sketching out Buggy's unlikely rise in his head. And what interested him most of all, Sky Island, the rumble fruit, and the man who called himself God, Eneru. To Kyle, the man was nothing more than a late-stage Chunibyo who'd been handed a powerful toy and started lording it over his little corner of the world. He wasn't essentially different from the mountain bandits back in East Blue who bullied villagers, just operating on a slightly larger scale. Guys like that were the easiest kind of problem. Crush him until he doubts his own existence, then toss him a pile of gold and show him there are bigger, more interesting things in the universe. He'd fall in line, start calling Kyle Big Brother, and become Kyle's sharpest blade for the upcoming lunar expedition. Karen stepped back quietly, making room for his god. Kyle leaned back in his chair and let his gaze drift toward the huge air bubbles of the Subodi archipelago beyond the window. The bubbles refracted rainbow halos in the sunlight and floated lazily into the sky, each one a tiny, fragile world, beautiful and easily burst, just like some self-styled gods. Rumble fruit, Eneru, pathetic. A man who called himself a god, but was undone by the world's own rules. Sky Island made a convenient fallback, but that devil fruit alone wasn't worth a personal visit. And Eneru, who'd seen how vast the universe was, would make a willing pawn in any scheme to reach the moon. And Lucci of CP0, shaped by the world government until all that remained was the instinct to kill, would probably wind up humiliated, reduced to scrubbing toilets someday. The last name Morgans had dropped, however, made Kyle smile despite himself. Buggy. A fierce pirate lunged with his blade. Buggy shrieked, his foot slipped, and as if by miracle, his body fell apart into pieces, the blade passing between them harmlessly. The attacker, carried forward by his own momentum, went headfirst into a barrel of gunpowder. Boom! When the smoke cleared, Buggy stood unscathed amid the rapturous cheers of his crew. "As expected of Captain Buggy," they shouted, hoisting him up. He struck a victory pose that made him feel strangely guilty as the townsfolk wept and worshipped him with tearful gratitude. Kyle couldn't help but let out a low snort. He could picture the whole ridiculous scene, the captain hiding behind his crew, victory resulting from a string of coincidences and misunderstandings, and the ignorant masses elevating him into a hero. Sometimes this world really was that absurd. Just then the office door eased open. A tall, slender woman stepped in, carrying a thick stack of documents. Her pace was light and steady. Dark hair fell like a curtain over her shoulders, framing a fair, delicate face. The dark, tailored dress hugged her in all the right places, outlining a figure that spoke as much of intelligence and self-possession as of beauty. It was Robin. Kyle let his eyes linger for a beat. Wealth really does change people, he thought, a silent sigh escaping him. The woman before him was nothing like the archaeologist he remembered. Worn down by hardship, wary-eyed and darker in complexion, always fighting to survive. In the years she had spent on Subodi, with no world government chases and no fear of an uncertain future, she had been able to rebuild herself. Her days were spent cataloging underworld intelligence from Karen or losing herself in the villa's library, a collection that could rival O'Hara's all-knowing tree. A steady life and a wealth of study had polished that raw stone until it shone, restoring the poise and quiet confidence befitting a scholar. "Kyle, these are the encrypted files Doflamingo sent from the North Blue." Robin set the documents on the table. Her voice was cool and pleasant, softened by a rare ease that came only when she felt safe. Kyle sat up straighter and, with a practiced casualness, picked up the top sheet. The stationery bore the Don Quixote family's flamingo crest at the top. Doflamingo's handwriting sprawled across the page as extravagantly as he carried himself. The letter's tone even seemed to contain a reverent undertow toward Kyle that made his skin crawl. Kyle skimmed the first 10 lines in a single sweep, reflexively discarding minutiae and zeroing in on the points that mattered. A familiar name jumped out at him, Guild Tesoro. Doflamingo wrote that the family had recently held an underworld auction in the North Blue, and the headline item was a devil fruits. Doflamingo had come into possession of the gold fruit. At the auction, a young man named Tesoro had shown unbelievable nerve, throwing down his entire fortune until, in the end, he won the fruit. Doflamingo admitted he had never intended to sell such a promising devil fruit, but after meeting Tesoro, he'd seen something in the man's eyes, an ambition and hunger that glowed like molten gold. Fu, the letter read in Doflamingo's voice. I saw in him eyes similar to mine, no, to my former self. So I gave him a startup fund, curious to see how high a bird with broken wings could fly. As it turned out, Tesoro did not disappoint. In a matter of months, Gil Tesoro used the power of the gold fruit and his almost ruthless business sense to multiply that fund many times over, shooting up through the underworld of North Blue. But this fat prize is getting too tempting. It's already drawing too many jackals. Until he really becomes a lion, any wealth he accumulates will only benefit others. I recommend he be brought to Saboti to meet the man who truly stands at the top of the world. Only your prestige can escort this golden ship, and all the fortune he creates will ultimately be yours. Kyle set the document down, tapping his fingers against the table in a slow rhythm. That Doflamingo certainly knew how to find ways to do favors for himself, and how to ask one in return. Still, he'd sent an interesting player. Gil Tesoro, the man bold enough to punch a celestial dragon in Mary Geoise for the woman he loved. Kyle's mouth twitched into an amused smile. He had Mariah rescue Stella and send her to Rouge in the East Blue precisely for this moment. He hadn't expected Doflamingo to, by accident and coincidence, complete the most important step for him ahead of schedule, delivering the gold fruit. This was shaping up to be more interesting than Kyle had expected. He was halfway through sketching out the foundation of his future entertainment empire when the office door was flung open. "Lord," an executive shouted, barreling in. His face was a disconcerting mix of alarm and excitement. Kyle frowned. His train of thought had been interrupted, and Robin stepped forward to bar the man with a cool, sharp look. "Compose yourself. This isn't how you behave." "Miss Robin, no," the man wheezed, visibly trying to catch his breath. He pointed past her in a frantic, jerking motion. "The furnace! Something's happened in the furnace!" The furnace was Karen's giant gladiatorial arena, a sanctioned dueling ground meant to let Sabaodi's two energetic pirates blow off steam. It was chaos incarnate, raw, violent fights staged day after day, where the strongest and most reckless clashed. For the official in charge to come in this unsettled, whatever had happened had to be exceptional. "Get to the point," Kyle said, his voice cutting through the room with unmistakable authority. The executive flinched, snapped to attention, and began to report as fast as he could. "A newcomer, my lord. Someone came to the deathmatch zone today. He only used one move," he continued, barely able to keep his voice steady. "One move, and he instantly killed the furnace's 10-time champion, Bone Crusher Barrow." Bone Crusher Barrow, 120 million berries on his head, a user of an animal-type devil fruit, thick-skinned and monstrously strong, was one of the furnace's acknowledged monsters. Kyle's expression finally shifted. For the first time, he showed a flicker of interest. "What's the newcomer's name?" "Gil Tesoro, 183, gambler." The top-floor skybox of the furnace was sealed off from the arena by thick one-way glass. When Aaron Kyle pushed the door open, the roar below, an ocean of sound, was cut by the invisible barrier until it was little more than a dull, distant hum. Robin followed him in and closed the door behind her. The suite itself was plush, soft carpets, deep leather sofas, and a long table piled with delicacies and fine wines. Aaron didn't sit. He crossed straight to the glass and stared down at the field. At the center of the sand lay a ruined shape, flesh and bone mashed together, dark red blood mingled with pale fragments until the whole was unrecognizable as human. Around the pile, the sand caught the light with an uncanny metallic sheen, as if stained with molten gold. That, Aaron knew at a glance, was Barrow, Bone Crusher, the 10-time champion of the furnace. Barrow had been the kind of fighter who took pleasure in crushing his opponent's bones inch by inch, savoring their screams. He probably never imagined, certainly not in life, that his own end would be crueler and more pitiful than any fate he ever inflicted on others. Across from the heap of gore stood a single man, motionless. His yellow-green hair was slicked back with surgical precision, and his vivid pink suit hung open to show a white shirt beneath. Several large gold rings flashed on his fingers, catching the arena lights like tiny suns. There was no triumphant grin, no satisfaction, only a blank, almost numb calm, as if he had merely brushed away an insect. A crew of furnace cleaners pushed carts into the ring, their faces drained of color. They worked stiffly, shoveling chunks of torn flesh into buckets. A few couldn't stomach it and staggered to the edge of the arena to vomit. The roar from the stands did not subside. If anything, it swelled into something more frenzied. Here, blood was the finest vintage. As the staff cleared the body, the man finally moved. He lifted his head slowly and fixed his gaze with surgical precision on the top-floor skybox where Aaron Kyle watched. The one-way glass hid Aaron's face, but it could not hide the weight of what he felt in that look. Lust, madness, and beneath them both, a terrible, desperate resolve. Gil Tesoro, the great fire at Mary Geoise, changed everything. After he escaped that inferno, his life took a sharp turn. In a few short years, using brutal efficiency and uncanny business instincts, he accumulated a fortune that would have made most men dizzy. But in the grand line, he quickly learned a hard truth. Wealth without power is just fresh meat. Every success only drew more covetous eyes and more treacherous hands. It was at an underground auction in the North Blue that his path intersected with Doflamingo. Sunglasses, that manic laugh, and an air that never quite let you forget who held the strings. He went all in for the gold fruit, spending everything he had. He had expected a violent fight for it. Instead, Doflamingo offered him an unexpected smile and a hint of counsel. "Fufu, you have a good eye," Doflamingo said. "But ambition alone won't carry you. Go to Sabaudi. If you can get his attention there, this sea will have a place for you." So he came to Sabaudi. He chose the most direct, dirtiest route to be noticed, a death match. That look he'd seen, it could only belong to one man, Aaron Kyle, the legendary pirate who stood at the very summit of the world, the wave-guiding king, a man for whom even the world government showed no concern. This was his one shot, and he intended to take it. Gil Tesoro's heart hammered in his chest, blood hot with adrenaline. From the opposite gate, the steel door creaked open, and an even more imposing figure stepped into the arena. He was massive, well over 4 meters tall, broad-shouldered and barrel-chested, his skin a map of deep, ugly scars. He carried a battle-axe taller than most men, and with every measured step the earth itself seemed to shiver. Whispers swelled through the stands. "Landslide, Gray, 150 million bounty." They say he's a devil fruit killer. His armament hockey can tear through any defense. That newcomer's luck won't hold. That last win was a fluke. Almost nobody in the crowd was on the side of the young man in the pink suit. Guild watched his opponent advance, a crazed light in his eyes. "Come on, let the gamble begin. I'm betting my life, everything. Either I win it all, or I lose everything." Roar! Landslide Gray didn't waste a word. He bellowed, planted his feet, and drove off with brutal force. He hunched his enormous frame, hefted the axe, and launched himself like a living cannonball, an unstoppable mass of muscle and momentum hurtling straight for Gil Tesoro. The great axe in his hand was coated in pitch-black armament hockey. The gust it threw off even ruffled Gil Tesoro's hair. Yet Tesoro didn't flinch. He simply raised his right hand slowly, fingers splayed. Just as the massive axe was about to cleave his face, something impossible happened. Without warning, the sand beneath Tesoro's feet surged in a torrent of gold, rising like a living thing and forming a towering wall that stopped the blade dead. Clang! The axe struck the golden barrier with a clear, ear-splitting ring. An overwhelming force shot up Gray's arm. The web of skin between his thumb and forefinger split under the strain. His unstoppable charge was brought to an abrupt halt. He stared in disbelief at the wall. Smooth as a mirror, not a single crack marred its surface. "What the hell is this?" he bellowed, wrenching at the axe, but the tip had been bitten into the golden barrier and would not budge. In the next instant, the wall's surface rippled like water, and innumerable golden tendrils snaked forth, wrapping around Gray's body with blinding speed. "Get off me!" Gray thrashed, slamming his will into his armament hockey and trying to wrench free from the golden restraints. The tentacles, however, were unyielding, tougher than anything he'd fought before. No matter how he strained, they didn't budge. Panic spiked when a cold, heavy numbness began to crawl outward from where the tendrils clung to him. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a takeover. His skin, his muscles, his bones, some alien force was assimilating them. "No, no!" he gasped, eyes wide with horror as the flesh of his arm went rigid and began to lose color. Inch by inch, it hardened into pure gold. He tried to scream for help, to beg, but nothing human came from his mouth, only a scalding stream of molten gold. A golden wave rose from the arena floor, climbing up his legs and swallowing him in an instant. In seconds, the transformation was complete. Where Landslide Gray had stood there was now a flawless statue of burnished gold, frozen in his final, desperate struggle. The face was trapped in a mask of terror and despair, every muscle and fold preserved in metal. The arena fell utterly silent. The spectators stared, stunned by the terrible, magnificent finality of the killing. Guild Tesoro walked slowly to the golden statue, extended a finger, and tapped it lightly. A dull thud echoed. Spiderweb cracks raced across the surface, and with a single crash, the whole thing disintegrated into a cloud of golden dust that glittered under the lights as it drifted down, beautiful and deadly. He looked up, his gaze cutting across the casino to the top-floor skybox hundreds of meters away. His eyes were no longer merely determined. They shone with proud self-regard and a nervous expectation of the final judgment waiting in that room. Inside the skybox, Aaron Kyle sat back on a leather sofa and set his glass of red wine down, the liquid still swirling. "Interesting," he murmured, a faint smile finally tugging at one corner of his mouth. A strong one. Robin, standing at his side, added softly, "And a capable gambler." Aaron's smile widened. "Yes, a gambler." He looked out toward the floor. "Someone please invite our future, god of wealth." 184. Tezzolo. The attendant from the furnace led the way, his uniform perfectly pressed, his steps steady and measured as if he were walking to a metronome. Guild Tesoro followed behind, his flamboyant pink suit a bright slash of color in the dim corridor. On the surface, the recent fight looked like a masterpiece. Tesoro had apparently crushed two bountied powerhouses, each worth over 100 million berries, with a spectacle both dazzling and strange. But only he knew how close he'd come to catastrophe. Against Bonebreaker Barrow he had played weak, baiting the charge and only triggering his devil fruit power at the very last instant. If he'd hesitated half a second longer, it wouldn't have been Barrow lying broken, it would have been him. The risk with Mountain Collapse Gray had been even worse. As the giant axe, sheened with pitch-black armament hockey, came down, Tesoro saw a single terrible image, the golden wall splitting apart and his body cleaved in two. He threw every ounce of strength into that wall, wagering that Gray's hockey couldn't punch through his all-or-nothing defense. He won that gamble. Memories of those moments, the calculations, the fear, the split-second choices, came back to him now. He could recall every dangerous scrape he'd ever been in. Packed on a rocking merchantman with a dozen cutlasses pressed against his ribs while he wondered how best to pry the captain's gold tooth loose. Standing on a shadowed wharf as an entire gang swallowed cargo worth tens of millions of berries, and calmly lighting a cigarette while he worked out how to make them cough it all back with interest. Even when a black slug had nicked his scalp and the barrel was still steaming, his only thought was that the shooter needed more practice. He had never been nervous, yet now, standing before an ordinary private room door, fine beads of sweat had crept into his palms before he even realized it. He drew in a steadying breath, straightened his suit collar, lifted his hand, and knocked 3 times on the heavy wood. "Please come in," a cool female voice answered from within. Tesoro pushed the door open. The room that greeted him was nothing like the monsters and murderous villains his imagination had conjured, no 3-headed, 6-armed brutes, no palpable air of malice. A black-haired man lounged on the sofa with his back to them, his posture lazy and unconcerned. Beside him, a dark-haired woman in a simple black dress stood quietly. Tesoro's eyes tightened. That face, he'd only seen it in fleeting glimpses, but he recognized it instantly. Nico Robin, the Devil Child. The sole survivor of the O'Hara Buster Call, hunted by the world government for over a decade, Countless groups had tried and failed to capture her and pry out the forbidden knowledge she possessed. To see someone the whole world pursued standing here unharmed, behaving like an ordinary secretary, hit him harder than the fact that he had just killed two powerhouses. The last shred of hope in Tesoro's chest vanished. He steadied himself, walked to the center of the room, and bowed to the man with his back turned. "Aaron Kyle, sir." Kyle didn't look over his shoulder. He rose from the sofa and moved slowly to the large one-way glass. "Come here," he said, his voice soft and perfectly measured, devoid of any visible emotion. Tesoro obeyed, stepping forward to stand a pace behind him. The sand in the arena had been swept clean, and a new round of death matches was underway. Two pirates tore into each other like animals, blades flashing, blood and flesh flying, while the crowd's shouts rose and fell in waves. "You were very clever," Kyle said softly, watching the carnage below. "You knew the most direct way to get my attention." Tesoro felt his chest tighten. He couldn't tell if that was praise or criticism. He kept silent. "I also admire your decisiveness," Kyle went on, "especially in that second match, the Golden Wall. That had to have drained you a great deal, didn't it?" "Yes," Tesoro admitted frankly. "I put everything into that one strike. A good gamble," Kyle said at last, a note of approval in his voice. "You have ambition and the courage to match it. Doffy sent me a fine gift." A surge of joy flared in Tesoro, but he held it down, bowing his head in respect. However, Kyle's tone shifted, becoming colder. At that moment, down in the arena, the fight was decided. A final, brutal blow landed. One pirate crumpled. The victor stood bloody and panting as the crowd erupted. A pirate's arm was severed cleanly. He stared at the spurting stump, then at his grinning opponent closing in, and his nerve broke. He gave a desperate scream and turned to run for the exit. In the furnace, that was the ultimate taboo. Once you stepped onto the deathmatch stage, only one person could leave alive. Running away was the gravest breach of the rules. "Everything has rules," Kyle murmured into Tesoro's ear. Before he finished the sentence, Kyle lifted his right hand and casually flicked his finger toward the reinforced glass of the private viewing room. There was no sound, no flash, only an almost imperceptible ripple that seemed to travel from his fingertip. A pinprick formed out of nowhere in the thick glass, the sort that should have resisted cannon fire. Several hundred meters away, the fleeing pirate suddenly went rigid. The next instant his body erupted into a spray of blood, as if some invisible fist had crushed him from the inside. It happened in a heartbeat, brutal, instantaneous, and utterly inexplicable. One moment a man was alive and shouting, the next he collapsed into a handful of red dust scattered across the sand. The noise in the arena cut off like someone had flipped a switch. Kyle turned his head slowly, his golden pupils taking in the chaos below, a faint, almost indulgent smile on his face. "I like capable people," he said, "and I also like people who understand the rules." A cold sweat drenched Tesoro's back. Seeing that smile sent a shiver from his feet to the top of his head. This was Aaron Kyle, the wave-guiding king. "Tesoro," Kyle continued, voice smooth as silk, "if you want to stay with me, ambition and courage aren't enough." Kyle settled back on the sofa. Robin handed him a cup of tea. Kyle picked it up and blew softly on the steam. "You also need to prove that you can create value for me," he said. Tesoro forced himself to breathe. This was his only chance. "I understand," he managed. "Command me, Mr. Kyle. I will complete any task." Kyle watched him with those unreadable eyes. "Your gold can't be created out of thin air, can it?" The word struck Tesoro like a physical blow. The limitation of the gold fruit, his greatest weakness, stared him in the face. He could shape gold, even transmute other metals into it, but he couldn't create it out of nothing. The total amount of gold he could command was limited by how much he already owned. He had never told anyone that. How did this man know? Seeing the raw surprise on Tesoro's face, Kyle gave a soft, amused chuckle. "Relax, I'm not after your secrets. I'm only interested in the value you can produce." He set his teacup down and leaned back in his chair with an easy, lazy air. "I'll have someone bring you to a place where gold is everywhere. There, you can build an actual golden empire." "Gold everywhere?" Tesoro's breath hitched. Kyle smiled, amusement playing at his mouth. "At the same time, that's where your mission is. On that island, there's a fellow who calls himself a god. Your job is simple. Use your devil fruit power to bring back as much gold as you can. And if you can capture that god and bring him back, make him understand who truly rules these seas, I'll be even more pleased." Kyle paused, a flash of expectation in his golden eyes. "Remember the name of the place." "Sky Island," Tesoro said, the word tasting like promise. Chapter 185, Incognito Visits. A small, ordinary skiff cut through the swell near Jaya, heading for the island at speed. Gecko Moria stood at the bow with his arms folded, his tall silhouette throwing a long shadow over the deck. The sea breeze tousled his purple hair. The defeat that had once warped his face was gone, replaced by a calm, inscrutable composure. Beside him, a half-step back, stood Guild Tesoro in a pink suit that looked absurd against the endless blue. Despite the flashy clothes, his posture was unusually deferential, humility faintly coloring his movements. "Mr. Moria," he said, voice careful and formal, "for this operation I humbly ask for your guidance." Fufufa chuckled, turning his head to regard him. "We're all partners working for Mr. Kyle now. No need for such formality. Just call me Senior." "Yes, Senior Moria," Tesoro replied obediently. He chose his next words with care, probing. "Senior, exactly what kind of person is Mr. Kyle?" The laugh died on Mariah's lips. He fell quiet, eyes growing distant. For a moment, a series of images flickered through his mind, brief, vivid scenes that raced past before he collected himself again. What lingered in his mind was the man's composure on the snowy plains of Wano, calmly planting his foot on Kaido's spiked club. It was the same man's imperious presence in a North Blue castle, seated on a throne, his mere aura forcing Doflamingo to bow. It was that colossal black hand blotting out the sky over Mary Geoise, the terrifying grandeur that stood equal to the Gorosei. Those golden eyes that commanded respect without a flicker of anger, that solitary figure who seemed to tower above the world. And then that image kept colliding with another, far less imposing one. The man soaking in the Sabaudi villa's hot spring, grumbling about his aging looks while the maids stifled giggles. The same man at the dinner table, being chided by Mahawk for refusing to eat bell peppers. The lazy figure stretched on a beach chair, sunglasses on, a manga in hand, snoring without a care in the world. Those two extremes warred in his head, and Mariah's mouth twitched as a result. He turned back and looked out over the endless sea, his voice loaded with meaning. "Mr. Kyle, he is a very vibrant person. You'll understand later." Vibrant? Tesoro tasted the word, puzzlement deepening. It felt completely at odds with the image he had of the wave-guiding king, the man who could erase even powerful opponents with a casual flick. Moria offered no further explanation. He shifted the conversation. "Junior, stop guessing what Mr. Kyle is thinking. First, we need to figure out how to deal with that so-called god in the sky." He didn't pat Tesoro's shoulder lightly. "For this operation, I'm mostly here to back you up. Whether we take Sky Island or not depends primarily on your strength." "I understand." Tesoro composed himself, his expression hardening. He took from his pocket a report Karen had prepared, a concise file on God Eneru, Rumble Rumble Fruit, a top-tier logia, mantra, and observation hockey blanketing the entire island. The Ark, Maxim, rumored to be capable of destroying islands. The report concluded Eneru had extremely high mastery of the Rumble Rumble Fruit. He might not have reached the so-called awakening, but he was unquestionably a top-tier logia user. Tesoro flipped through the pages, mind racing. "My armament hockey isn't top-tier," he said quietly. "If Eneru can coat himself in electricity and see everything on the island, I won't be able to reliably land a hit unless we change the conditions of the fight." "A direct confrontation stands almost no chance of winning," he told himself. Tesoro knew brute force wasn't his advantage. The powers of the gold fruit were mutable and unpredictable, but confronting Eneru, who could turn himself into lightning and move at the speed of light, meant any elaborate technique was liable to fail simply for lack of speed. The opportunity to defeat him, he suspected, might come only once. Tesoro's eyes glit, red with a mixture of calculation and madness as he murmured to himself. He had to design a perfect trap, a golden cage from which even Eneru, who fancied himself a god, could not escape. Meanwhile, on the Grand Line in the Alabasta Kingdom, the sun baked the endless desert. Heat shimmered off the dunes, turning distant ripples into mirages. A caravan of more than a dozen camels plodded slowly across the yellow sands. Kyle rode with the easy, lazy posture of a backpacker, wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and plain traveler's clothes. Beside him was the caravan's leader, a middle-aged man named Jack, dark-skinned, weathered, and talkative. "Brother Black, I'm not exaggerating," Jack said, taking a long swallow of water, wiping his mouth, and spitting as he spoke. "Back in the day, I got lost out in the desert by myself and ran straight into the most vicious sand scorpion bandits," Jack said, waving his hand and grinning. "There was a gleaming scimitar at my throat, right there, but me, your brother Jack, I didn't even blink. Then, whoosh thwack, I backhanded their leader clean off his camel." Kyle laughed. "Brother Jack, you're incredible. Why didn't you go to sea and become a pirate? You'd probably have a bounty in the hundreds of millions of berries by now." Jack gave a rueful shrug. "Don't joke about it. I get seasick. Otherwise, with my skills, I'd be ruling the waves as a sea emperor by now." Kyle almost choked on his drink. Then Jack's grin faltered. He snapped the reins, halting his camel. The smile drained from his face. Over the crest of the next dune, a dark mass poured into view. Dozens of riders on taller, meaner desert camels. They carried scimitars and firearms, faces curled into cruel sneers, and they surged around the small caravan like vultures. "It's Vulture Haig's men," someone in the caravan cried, voice high with fear. The swagger fled from Jack's face in an instant. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice steady. "Good sirs, we're headed for Rainbase. Please make way. We'll pay well for a clear path through this stretch of sand." A bald, barrel-chested man rode his camel forward. He carried a massive zanbato that looked absurdly heavy for one man to swing, and he laughed with contempt. "Enough talk. Leave the goods and the women, and you can ride off. Refuse, and we'll take everything." Jack went pale and began to tremble. Kyle watched the exchange with amusement, then glanced at Jack. The desert tough, who had only moments ago been boasting he could kill a bandit leader in a single swing, was quaking now. "Brother Jack," Kyle said lazily, "where's your sword? Go whoosh, thwack, and take him down." Jack almost sobbed. "Brother Black, don't tease me. That's Haig. We're talking an 8 million berries bounty here." 8 million, huh? Kyle nodded as if it were a curiosity. Impressive. He thought about his own bounty for a heartbeat, something over 4 billion berries, then shrugged. It didn't matter. Haig had heard everything. He fixed Kyle with a hard look. "Kid, you don't look scared at all." Kyle shrugged, casual as ever. "Scared of what?" "I'm just a backpacker. I don't have many berries." Haig and his gang froze for a heartbeat, then erupted into loud, cruel laughter. "Ha! What an idiot!" One of them snorted. "Boss, let me twist his head off," another growled, already reaching for his blade. Haig waved a hand and stopped them. He leaned back, studying Kyle with an amused glint in his eye. "You're entertaining, kid. Since you've made me laugh, I'll give you a choice. Kneel and lick my boots clean, and I'll let you live." Everyone in the caravan stared at Kyle with pity. In their view, the poor fool had no chance. Kyle let out a soft sigh. He'd only planned a vacation and a look into what Crocodile had done to Alabasta, but trouble always seemed to find him. "No thanks," he said. "I'm not licking boots. Not into men's feet." He looked Haig straight in the eye. 186, a wolf in sheep's clothing. The desert hung utterly still, broken only by the uneasy snorts of camels. Haig and his gang, fierce-looking bandits all, lay sprawled on the blistering sand, foaming at the mouth and with their eyes rolled back, as if life had been leached from their bodies in an instant. Jack sat frozen on his camel, mouth gaping, every tremor he'd had moments before replaced by a hollow, stunned stiffness. He'd watched them charge, then watched them drop, one after another, less than 10 meters away, collapsing without a single warning. The whole scene was so impossible his scalp prickled. "Be Brother Black, just now." His voice came out dry and shaking. He craned his neck toward the young man beside him, who was still lounging as if nothing had happened. Kyle yawned, rubbed his eyes, and spread his hands with an innocent smile. "Heh, beats me," he said, sounding almost cheerful. "Maybe it's the heat. They ran too hard and got heat stroke. Looks like nap time." "Nap time? Heat stroke?" Jack echoed, incredulous, unable to reconcile the casual shrug with the wreckage at their feet. Jack stared at the dozens of unconscious burly men sprawled across the sand, then at Kyle's calm, innocent face, and felt a chill run down his spine. The more he thought about it, the more he suspected that this so-called backpacker was anything but ordinary. For the rest of the trip, the mood in the caravan was strained. Everyone gave Kyle a wide berth, watching him with a mix of awe and unease. Only Jack, after a few moments to collect himself, slowly forced his bravado back. They reached a town in Alabasta without further incident. As they prepared to part ways, Jack cleared his throat, thumped his chest, and slipped back into his gruff desert man act. "Ah, Brother Black, don't go thinking I didn't make a move earlier," he said, spitting for emphasis as he gestured. "I was just playing weak on purpose to throw them off. Who'd have thought they were so sensitive to the sun? One by one they dropped. Back in my day, I crossed the desert alone for 49 days straight without blinking." Kyle smiled and nodded, not exposing him. "Brother Jack is mighty," he said. "That's right," Jack answered, chin up. Then he lowered his voice and leaned in, conspiratorial. "Listen to me. This place is too deep for you to handle. Alabasta hasn't been peaceful lately. Be careful. Crocodile's territory swallows people whole. Thanks for the warning, Brother Jack." Kyle waved as Jack led the caravan down the street until it disappeared from view. The smile he gave then was a little more genuine. Jack was an interesting man. Isn't that exactly why he kept his identity hidden and left his imperial guard, Xiao Ying, behind, an incognito visit to see the place as an ordinary person, to watch real lives, feel the pulse of the city, and maybe play dumb to lure a tiger? Kyle slipped into a vacant alley, hugging the shadows as he moved. After a few practiced turns, the scruffy young backpacker act fell away. In its place strode a gilded heir, gold and silver at his throat, a flashy silk shirt, hair slicked back, his face announcing without subtlety, "I'm rich and foolish." He swaggered out of the alley with a jewel-encrusted cane, turning heads as he went. Alabasta, Rain Base. This was a lawless stretch of land the Royal Army dared not touch. The air inside throbbed with the smell of money, the sharp sting of alcohol, and a metallic, almost sweet tang of despair. Rain Banquet, the biggest casino for miles across the desert, was the heart of it all. The main hall rattled with sound, the clack of dice, the whisper and slap of cards, the scrambling of chips, and the raw shouts and sobs of men chasing luck. All of it braided into a single fevered symphony: desire. "Cheating! How dare you cheat on my turf?" A voice cut through the noise like a blade. A burly gambler, eyes bloodshot from losing, shoved his table over in a spray of chips and broken glass. He ripped a scimitar from his waist and jabbed the curved blade toward the dealer's face, snarling. Casino guards rushed in a ring around him, but he swung the weapon like a man with nothing to lose. For a moment, no one dared close the distance. From the VIP balcony on the second floor, a figure sat in a large armchair, watching the commotion below. The man in the chair said nothing, merely observing as the chaos unfolded beneath him. He was ridiculous in the heat. A heavy black fur coat over a desert's glare, a gilded hook where his left hand should be, an expensive cigar clenched between his teeth. Smoke curled around his face, hiding everything but two eyes that seemed to look down on the world with pure contempt. They called him the Desert Crocodile. Crocodile. Without even turning his head, he flicked his hook impatiently. In response, a sandstorm sprang up as if summoned, roaring across the room and swallowing the troublemaker who had been causing a commotion. The sand rushed over him like ravenous locusts, forcing its way into his mouth, nose, eyes, and ears, coating every inch of skin. A strangled sound escaped the strong man, but no full scream. His body betrayed him, skin tightening, drying out with terrifying speed until it clung to bone. He collapsed into a twisted, desiccated husk and thudded to the floor. Silence fell over the hall. Gamblers froze mid-bet, staring at the corpse with wide, horrified eyes. Cold sweat rolled down foreheads. Crocodile snorted, mild, dismissive, and, apparently uninterested, rose and strolled toward the office in the back. After the shock, the casino's atmosphere grew even more feverish. In the crowd's eyes, along with fear, there was a savage kind of excitement. Rain Banquet was a mad paradise where the strong ruled and people wagered more than money, sometimes even life and death. The guards soon dragged the trash off the floor, and the games resumed as if nothing had happened. At the entrance, a waiter greeted a new customer with an ingratiating smile. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Rain Banquet. What would you like to play?" The man removed a tall top hat with an enormous feather, revealing a young, slightly foolish face, Kyle in disguise. His flashy, gold-trimmed, nouveau-rich outfit made the well-seasoned waiter's eyes sparkle despite himself. That look, those clothes, an electric thrill ran through the waiter. Easy mark. Jackpot. 99% profit. Bring him in. 187. Your future has no chance of success. Hello, sir. Welcome to Rain Banquet. How many berries would you like to exchange for chips? The waiter's smile was flawless and his tone politely deferential, but his eyes, sharpened by years of serving rich patrons, had already taken Kyle in from head to toe. The clothes, the awkward manner, the naive curiosity, a small, gleeful contempt warmed him. This was clearly a country bumpkin, fresh off the boat. Kyle looked around the room with wide-eyed interest, then slowly dug a crumpled bill from his pocket and handed it over. 100,000 berries. For a heartbeat, the waiter's smile faltered. One eye twitched. So this was the whole show, some young man pretending to be a big spender when he was really just barely scraping by. He felt the familiar, quiet scorn, but professionalism snapped him back into place. The smile returned, perfectly warm. All right, sir, 100,000 berries. Please wait a moment. A few gamblers nearby snorted or muttered under their breath. With his expression unchanged, the waiter handed Kyle a modest stack of chips and led him toward the humblest table in the room. Sir, this is our most popular game, Desert Flower. The rules are simple. The attractive dealer swayed her hips as she spoke, her voice syrupy as she explained the play. Each side is dealt 3 cards, then you raise the stakes and finally reveal to compare hands. Kyle nodded along, a sudden look of recognition brightening his face. Isn't this just golden flower? Back then, Chen Daozai turned 20 berries into 37 million. No problem for me, he thought. Turning 100,000 into 4.9 billion berries? Easy. A small, satisfied smile crossed his lips as he pushed forward a neat pile of chips. He won the first round. He won the second. He won the third. After 3 straight victories, his stack had already doubled. Excitement flushed his cheeks, his breathing grew a touch heavier, and his eyes shone, the picture of a gambler riding a streak. Oh, yes! I won again! He cried in a low, excited roar, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. A few longtime gamblers at the next table, veterans of countless casino nights, watched the scene with curled lips and quiet amusement. Another one, they thought. Everyone who falls into this bottomless pit starts out believing Lady Luck will always be on their side. Even after losing 9 out of 10 hands and draining their account, they stubbornly tell themselves, next hand, I'll win it back on the next hand. People like that can strip even the wealthiest clean. The dealer's eyes flashed with opportunity. She drew herself up, let her curvaceous form sway, winked at Kyle, then slipped the 3 newly dealt cards into her cleavage and made her voice saccharine sweet. Sir, you're really on a roll tonight. It looks like the god of fortune has chosen you. Perfectly timed flattery was tailor-made to hook a gambler. Flattered, Kyle swept his arm in a grand gesture and called over to a nearby waiter. Bring me 3 million more berries and chips. Tonight, I'm taking this place. The waiter's face lit up. His heart leapt. Here we go. That's how a big spender behaves. He nearly ran over to Kyle, took the gold card Kyle handed him with a formal bow, then gave a subtle wink to a coworker. Quick, take this VIP to the deep sea table and tell Fen Suiji to get ready, he mouthed. A man who looked like a manager materialized a moment later, all smiles, and personally escorted Kyle up to a quieter, more luxurious private room on the casino's 2nd floor. This was the deep sea table, a place to entertain big spenders, and when necessary, a slaughterhouse for any fat sheep that didn't know their limits. Across the felt sat a thin man with an unremarkable face and hawk-sharp eyes, a chill in them that came from years spent in schemes and gambling dens. He was Rain Banquet's ace, the man everyone called Fen Suiji. Rumor said he'd driven 80 to 100 rich businessmen and nobles into ruin. When Kyle entered, Fen Suiji only gave a faint nod. His expression remained unreadable. To him, this was just another mark, another prey to be ground down. The game restarted. It was the 5th round, and once again the pile of chips in front of Kyle swelled, doubled in an instant. Fen Suiji snorted inwardly, his face betraying nothing. Beginner's luck, he thought. It wouldn't last. 7th round. The chips in front of Kyle had formed a little mountain. The casual expression on Fen Suiji's face slipped away. He watched Kyle in silence, his gaze narrowing. Interesting. Ninth round. Kyle's pile had topped 30 million berries. Fen let out a slow breath and flexed his hand until his knuckles cracked. He said nothing, but the air around him seemed to grow heavier, just enough pressure to be noticed. A challenge, but still manageable. 11th round. The stack climbed past 50 million. A vein throbbed at Fen's temple. He couldn't help glancing at the dealer beside him, where her movements had been smooth a moment before. A fine film of sweat now mapped her brow. She flicked him the slightest look, a discreet signal that everything was under control. He's getting nervous, Fen thought. He's getting nervous. 13th round. Call. Kyle pushed every chip forward in one lazy sweep. Under the lights, the colorful mound glittered enticingly. 200 million berries. Fen Suiji's face went white. Sweat beaded at his temples and ran down into his collar. The stack of chips before him was a tiny fraction of Kyle's, so small that even if he sold himself off, he couldn't cover the debt. The waiters and guards gathered around fell silent, stunned. Fen had gambled before, but never like this. Could this flashy upstart really be blessed by the god of gamblers? Kyle cocked his head and smiled innocent. What? Out of money? He drawled. If you haven't got any cash, what the hell are you even playing for? Fen fixed him with a hard stare, his chest heaving. He had lost, yet the thought of admitting it was unbearable. This was Crocodile's territory. In a place like this, blowing that kind of money didn't mean humiliation alone. It meant a fate worse than death, being turned into jerky and sold off. Then, as if some desperate idea had taken hold, the despair in his eyes hardened into cold, reckless resolve. Next round, he told himself, I can't lose. He shot to his feet and slammed his remaining chips onto the felt, along with a battered IOU issued by the casino. This hand, he rasped, voice raw and hungry with desperation, I'm betting everything. The beautiful dealer trembled almost imperceptibly. Fen Suiji was resorting to his last move. Kyle's foolish grin spread wider. He clapped once and said, Good, I'll call. The dealer drew a breath and began the most important deal of her life. Her fingertips slid over the backs of the cards with a sleight of hand so subtle no outsider could detect it, and she guided 3 specific cards into Fen Suiji's hand. The cards were laid out. Fen Suiji's hands shook as he peeled back a corner of the first card, Ace of Spades. He turned the second, Ace of Hearts. He snapped the third open, Ace of Diamonds. 3 aces, the best possible hand in this deck. He had to have won. Wild elation surged through him. The muscles in his face contorted until they formed a cruel, triumphant smile. He looked up at Kyle as if staring down a corpse. Kyle didn't even glance at his own cards. He leaned back, serene, his golden pupils reflecting Fen Suiji's rapture. Then, for an instant, a faint red glow flickered in his eyes. He met the other's gaze, and speaking in a low voice that nevertheless carried through the private room, said, You stand no chance of winning in the future. Chapter 188. If it's difficult, then don't do it. To Fen Suiji, that flippant remark sounded like a defeated dog's last howl. He bared his teeth in a cold, white smile and laughed. A high, cutting sound. Kid, it's too late to beg for mercy now. Show your cards. Let me enjoy your face when you lose. Deng, deng, leng, deng, 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 deng. Aaron Kyle shrugged, held up 2 fingers, and calmly picked up the first card on the table. He flipped it over without hurry. A multicolored 2. Fen Suiji's grin widened, contempt nearly spilled from his eyes. Aaron turned the second card, multicolored 3. Fen Suiji was already picturing Aaron's miserable, tear-streaked expression. Aaron's fingers hovered over the last card. He didn't flip it right away. Instead, he looked up at the man opposite him, whose face was already twisting with anticipation, and a faint, mischievous smile tugged at his lips. Then he flicked his wrist. The card drew a lazy arc through the air, twirled, and landed face up, a 5 of clubs. 2, 3, 5. Fen Suiji's smile froze mid-sneer. In an instant, his pupils pinpricked with shock. His face twitched as if struck by lightning. He froze in place. How could this be? 2, 3, 5. The only hand in this game that could beat a 3 of a kind was the legendary all-kill. Silence swallowed the private room. Fen Suiji's bloodshot eyes stayed glued to those 3 cards as if he could burn through them with his gaze. Then he snapped his head toward the pretty dealer beside him, his stare so fierce it felt like it could devour her. Her legs gave way with a dull thud. She crumpled to the floor, pale and trembling, unable to form a single word. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. She had dealt the cards herself. She personally handed him 3 aces. The boy across from him had clearly been dealt junk. How could the result be like this? You dared to cheat me! Fensuigi finally broke out of his shock and let out a bestial roar. You cheater! You must have cheated. If you're not good, practice more, Aaron Kyle said, nonchalantly picking at his ear, his face calm as ever. If you can't play, don't play. Those words shattered the last shred of reason in Fensuigi. Only one thought remained. Cheated or not, this man had to die today, or Fen would. With a wild cry, he drew a gleaming dagger from his coat and lunged at Aaron Kyle. The casino guards reacted instantly, weapons out as they surged toward Aaron from all sides. Aaron, however, didn't move from his chair. He watched the rushing men with a faint smile and said, almost playfully, "Oh dear, the floor's very slippery. Be careful." No sooner had he spoken than the guard in front suddenly lost his footing and pitched forward. The men behind couldn't avoid him. They stumbled, then the next, then the next. With a chorus of curses, thuds, and the clatter of armor, a dozen guards collapsed into a tangled pile. In the private room, Fensuigi still stood. He was one step from Aaron, dagger raised, breathing hard. Then a cold, hoarse voice came from beyond the door. "Heh! What a disgrace!" Before Aaron could finish his sentence, a violent current of sand surged through the open door. It coalesced into a giant palm that scooped up the heap of guards on the floor, and Fensuigi with them, and flung them mercilessly out of the private room. Screams and the sick crack of bones echoed down the corridor, then died away. When the yellow sand thinned, a tall figure filled the doorway. A heavy black fur coat hung from broad shoulders. A golden hook flashed at his side, and a cigar was clenched between his teeth. He was the owner of the casino, the Sand Crocodile. Crocodile stepped into the room, his gaze scanning the mountain of chips on the table before settling on Aaron Kyle with a cold, calculating look. "Kid, you're lucky," Crocodile said, blowing a smoke ring. "Do me one favor. Leave the money and walk away." "A favor?" Aaron laughed, the sound erupting like he'd heard the world's biggest joke. He doubled over, wiping his eyes. "Where does a punk like you get a favor?" He was baiting him for the pleasure of it. Crocodile's expression hardened. The hook at his hand flashed ominously. A cruel smile twisted his mouth as he let out a low, harsh laugh. "Interesting. It seems you don't understand the rules here. In my territory, I make the rules." Crocodile stepped forward, his presence a crushing weight that bore down on Aaron Kyle. "Not following them makes things very difficult for me." Difficult. Aaron's easy smile vanished. He rose, slowly, and the room seemed to take notice. Then, in a voice that was not quite his, low, cold, unmistakably Crow's, he said, "If it's difficult, then don't do it." With one hand planted on the gambling table, he flipped it over as if it were nothing. The mahogany table, several hundred kilos of solid wood, hurtled through the air toward Crocodile with a thunderous crash. As it flew, the light and shadow across Aaron's face shivered and changed. The careless, spoiled expression of the rich air dissolved like a reflection on disturbed water. In its place was a face both elegant and terrifying, radiating authority. His black hair lifted though there was no breeze, and his golden pupils were so deep they seemed to hold entire galaxies. Crocodile reacted on instinct. He swung his golden hook and expelled a blade of sand. The sand slasher met the flying table and split it cleanly in two. Amid a spray of flying wood chips, his gaze cut through the dust and landed on that face. His pupils suddenly contracted, and the cigar clenched between his teeth clattered to the ground. That man, that face, impossible. How could he be here? The wave-guiding king, Aaron Kyle. 189. Let's dance. Crocodile froze. His whole body went rigid and his mind emptied. Wave-guiding king, Aaron Kyle. That name hung over him like a dark cloud, heavy enough to suffocate anyone with ambition. How could he be here? Why in Alabasta? What was he doing? A dozen questions exploded in Crocodile's head, but his limbs wouldn't obey. Then Kyle moved. He took 2 calm steps forward, hooked a finger under the fallen cigar, still flecked with sand, and plucked it from the ground. He walked up to Crocodile, and beneath the other man's narrowed, shocked gaze, casually placed the cigar back between his lips. The motion was as effortless and familiar as handing a cigar to an old friend. The gesture was an insult that struck at Crocodile's pride as a ruthless overlord. Humiliation, blatant, deliberate humiliation. Blood rushed to his head. He stumbled back, his face twisting with rage. A low, strangled roar fought its way out of his throat as his body trembled with barely contained fury. "You bastard, what kind of joke is this?" Admitting defeat was one thing. Surrendering without a fight, throwing in the towel in such a shameful, muddled way, was unthinkable. Crocodile had gone toe-to-toe with Bullet, the demon descendant, and had even dared to challenge Whitebeard, the sea overlord. Even when he came up short, those fights had proven his worth. He had spent years in silent exile in the desert, scheming over an ancient weapon that could overturn the world. Crocodile would not be humiliated. He was not inferior to anyone. "Sandstorm!" he roared, driving his golden hook into the sand. The strike was like a detonator. A thunderous boom ripped through the air as his fury condensed into raw force. Around him, an endless wall of yellow sand shot skyward, a towering vortex centered on Crocodile that swept outward with unstoppable momentum. The Rain Banquet Casino stood directly in its path. The casino's stone and steel held no chance. Buildings that had seemed sturdy crumpled like parchment under the onslaught, torn, shredded, and ground into choking dust that turned the sky a filthy gold. The whole city trembled. People spilled from the wreckage, gamblers and residents alike, screaming and stumbling as they fled. Terror twisted their faces as the sandstorm swallowed everything in its path. They fled in a panic toward the city outskirts. When they dared to look back, the sky was gone, replaced by a colossal tornado of sand that bridged heaven and earth and rolled with a dull, swallowing roar. Alabasta had but one color left, yellow. From the heart of that storm came Crocodile's hoarse, arrogant shout. "In my kingdom, I am a god." His voice carried. Here, in this land of sand, he held the absolute advantage. "What can you possibly use to fight me, Kyle?" he taunted, expecting fear. But the answer was not a plea. A streak of black and gold light ripped across the sky, an enormous slash, silent yet overwhelming, like a blade that could split the heavens. Wherever that light passed, the raging sandstorm was cleanly cut open, as if a red-hot knife had sliced through butter. Sunlight poured through the gap, the swirling sand above stilled. Deep inside the storm, Crocodile's sand form reassembled. He was not harmed, but cold sweat instantly soaked his temples. A lazy voice drifted to him. "Oh, missed." It was spoken as if the matter were trivial, but to Crocodile, the casualness was worse than any shout. He felt a cold panic curl through him, squeezing his heart like a vine. If that strike had been aimed at him instead of the sandstorm, he wouldn't have survived. The image came unbidden and sharp. His blood felt as if it were freezing. He watched, stunned, as Kyle, after delivering that earth-shattering blow, slowly sheathed the black and gold naginata. He remained planted, letting the desert wind whip around him. A halo of black and gold light flowed along his body, holding every grain of sand at bay. The particles spun in the air but could not touch him. Kyle's stance was tall and unyielding, calm as a statue. Kyle regarded the pale, rigid man before him and spoke, slow and measured. "You know, little sand." His golden pupils swept across the endless dunes, and though his voice was quiet, it cut through the wind and reached Crocodile perfectly. "Besides silicon dioxide, there's also iron in the desert." The words had barely left his mouth when the earth answered. A low, resonant hum rolled up through the ground. Crocodile's pupils snapped wide. He lowered his head in disbelief and stared at the sand beneath his feet. Within that endless yellow sea, dark specks, grain by grain, thread by thread, piece by piece, were being wrenched out from between the sand particles. They shivered, clustered, and inexorably rose into the air. Iron sand, the desert's metal. Under Kyle's will, the scattered metals buried across tens of thousands of square kilometers answered their king's summons, waking as if from a long sleep. Kyle didn't let himself be surprised. He spread his arms, shut his eyes, and seemed to embrace the black world he had called into being. "Dance!" A deep rumble rolled across the dunes. The iron sand obeyed, swirling and coalescing behind him into a black tempest, vaster, darker, and more terrifying than Crocodile's own sandstorm. From a distance, the two storms hung in the sky, different in color but equal in menace, confronting one another and cleaving the heavens into two halves. On one side, the yellow sandstorm, raw destruction, the force of nature unleashed. On the other, the iron-black maelstrom, cold, metallic, and merciless. Across from them, a black iron tide surged, an omen of death and finality. Under the clash of those two forces, the whole of Alabasta seemed to sink into a deathly silence. You might ask, Kyle could have ended the fight with a single hockey-infused slash, so why put on such a flashy display? The answer is simple, because it's more fun that way. And you might ask, for something so minor he could have sent his men, so why come himself? Well, Xiaoying is out of the picture. God only knows which swordsman he's off enthusiastically crossing blades with this time. Above Alabasta, the sky was split cleanly in two. On one side, Crocodile's proud yellow sandstorm raged like a natural disaster. On the other, Kyle had summoned a black tide of iron grit, deep, silent, and ominous, a prelude to the end. The two forces met and tore into each other, grinding, biting, and devouring in midair. Iron grit and yellow sand scraped together with a high, wrenching scream, throwing off showers of sparks. For a moment, the whole world felt like a giant grinding machine. In the center of that maelstrom, Crocodile stood ashen, cold sweat running down his temples and soaking his collar. His desert home field advantage had been reduced to a joke in the face of his opponent. His opponent could draw even more destructive iron from the sand, an outrageous ability. Retreat. He had to get away. Crocodile's mind raced, feverishly calculating every possible escape route. But on the other side of the clearing, Kyle seemed utterly unconcerned, as if he were taking a leisurely walk through a garden. He casually reached out, letting the cold, metallic grains of the iron sandstorm flow through his fingers, a small smile of pleasure on his face. Crocodile felt his options narrowing. Then Kyle vanished from where he stood. Not good. An alarm blared in Crocodile's head. Years of battle-hardened instinct kicked in. He pivoted and stepped back while whipping up a wall of sand to shield himself. Whatever strike he had expected, though, did not come from the front. A chill crawled up his spine. Something was wrong behind him. He sensed it and snapped his head around. A hand, crackling with black and red lightning, had already closed around his throat. It was flesh and blood, but harder than sea stone, impossible for his proud elemental form to slip free from. Strength leached out of his limbs and bones as the grip tightened. Ugh! Crocodile's eyes bulged, and a painful whimper escaped him. His will gave way. The towering yellow sandstorm that had blotted out the sky collapsed like an unsupported column, crumbling into a rain of sand. The black tide of iron ebbed as well, breaking into countless particles that sank back into the boundless desert as if it had never been. The sky cleared to a calm, azure blue. The scene shifted. On the endless ocean, a small, otherwise unremarkable boat drifted gently with the waves. Kyle lounged in a deck chair, sunglasses on, basking in the sun and nursing a glass of iced orange juice. Opposite him sat a figure wrapped head to toe in bandages, only eyes and mouth exposed. A cigar was clenched between his teeth. He puffed gloomily and let the smoke curl up into the air. "Smoking when you're injured, that's not very smart," Kyle said, taking another slow sip of his juice. Crocodile's visible eye twitched violently. "Why don't you say who put me in this state?" The thought seethed behind his bandages. This bedraggled, bandaged mummy was none other than the once proud desert crocodile, Crocodile himself. Subdued by Kyle, he'd been unceremoniously invited aboard this returning little boat. "Kyle," Crocodile said nothing. A lazy barb from the other man slammed into the one tender place no weapon could reach. Kyle's drawl landed with surgical precision, reopening a wound Crocodile had buried long ago. The cigar between Crocodile's lips went rigid. His whole face tightened, and the eyes beneath his bandages flashed dangerously. Kyle didn't even seem to notice. He kept talking, almost to himself. "It must have been rough, losing to Whitebeard, huh? I lost to him when I was young, too. Of course I wouldn't go hunting him now. I'm a new-era pirate. I respect the old and look after the new." He pushed his sungal, asses up, and the gold in his irises caught the light, playful and unashamed. "You're after that thing, aren't you? The ancient weapon, Pluton." The name hit harder than any blade. Crocodile lurched upright so quickly his chair scraped the sand. The eyes under his bandages pinned Kyle like a spear. His voice came out rough like sandpaper. How do you know?" "That secret was everything. It was why he had spent years in exile, why he had abandoned his rank and influence in the New World and been hiding out in this desert. It was his greatest trump card. "Well, isn't this a coincidence, my friend?" Kyle said with a grin, white teeth flashing. "I just happen to have an archaeologist back home who can read poneglyphs." Crocodile froze. An archaeologist who could read poneglyphs, one of the survivors of O'Hara, was the last thing he expected to hear. Kyle drained his drink and flicked the empty cup into the sea. "So save yourself the trouble," he added, voice flat but unambiguous. "There's no Pluton in Alabasta." He spoke with an easy certainty that left no room for argument. He plainly knew the blueprints for Pluton were in Water 7 and that the ship itself lay dormant in Wano country. Crocodile said nothing. His cigar burned down, the ash falling unnoticed onto the bandages that wrapped his hand. More than 10 years of searching, exhausted, and coming up empty, a sudden crushing sense of loss and bewilderment washed over him. Kyle watched the moment of defeat, crossed his legs, and leaned back. He offered the only concession he'd prepared. "Instead of chasing such an illusion, why not work with me?" Slowly, Crocodile lifted his head, eyes clouded with wariness and confusion. 5 types of insurance, a housing fund, a year-end bonus, and room and board. Kyle counted off on his fingers, earnest as if listing employee benefits. "And best of all, I'll let you feel what it's like to set foot on Marineford and punch Maryjoyce in the face. So, tempted yet?" He stood, arms spread, the sea breeze whipping at his coat. A wildly confident smile lit his face. "Pirate King? Boring. Besides, I already did that with Roger. What I want is to be the freest person in the world. Go wherever I want. Fight whoever I want. No law on this sea can bind me anymore. I will be the only rule." The arrogant declaration rode the wind. Crocodile watched the man's back, his chest tightening. Overthrow the world. Wasn't that exactly what he had always wanted? He had planned to do it by mastering an ancient weapon. But this man wanted to topple the world head-on, blunt and violent and unbearably proud. In comparison, Crocodile's own designs suddenly felt small and almost ridiculous. He looked at Kyle and understood. This was something else entirely. This, he realized, was what true freedom looked like. Crocodile's bewilderment slowly drained from his face, replaced by a cold, controlled intensity he hadn't noticed until it settled over him. He lowered his head, masking the flicker of emotion in his eyes, and drew another cigar from his pocket. A thin trail of blue smoke curled up, softening the lines of his expression. After a long pause, a low, hoarse sentence, almost reluctant, forced its way out between his teeth. "That's a bold claim, boss," Kyle snorted. "What, are you stupid?" Crocodile's gaze sharpened. "Then answer me this. Do you actually understand the businesses under your command?" "Businesses?" Kyle blinked, thinking for a moment. "Oh, those. There are so many of them. I suppose some of them are doing fine." "You suppose?" Crocodile's voice went cold. "Do you know how many berries the furnace dat on Sabaody pulls in every day? Do you know how much it makes each month from broadcast rights and merchandise? And that doesn't even count the number of potential fighters it's brought into your orbit." Kyle waved a hand dismissively. "Karen runs that. He's handling it, doing well." He nodded, satisfied. Crocodile's jaw tightened, anger flushed up his neck. "Doing well? More than well. That's a brilliant business model," Crocodile snapped. "But what about you? You're the boss. What have you actually been doing besides lying there sunbathing? Do you even track where the money goes? Have you drawn up the next expansion plan?" He jabbed a finger so close to Kyle's face it might have grazed him. The arms trade in North Blue, the underworld port in West Blue, and several of the most lucrative shipping lanes in the New World. On paper, those are owned by different groups, but every trail of capital leads back to you. With that much activity in the underworld and that kind of cash flow, you should have a clear roadmap for the future. The more Crocodile spoke, the more agitated he became. He watched Kyle with the exasperated look of a hard-working founding elder scolding a pampered heir who'd been raised on ease. In Alabasta, he had seen Kyle's godlike power. On the small boat, he'd been shaken by Kyle's grand talk of overturning the world. He had thought he was following the most terrifying overlord in history. Instead, he found an absentee owner who didn't even know the details of his own empire. He was a slacker who only cared about sunbathing and drinking orange juice. The contrast was so stark that whatever respect Crocodile had just started to feel evaporated and was replaced by pure exasperation. Faced with Crocodile's roar, Kyle just yawned and lazily waved a hand. Ugh, such a hassle. Leave that to Karen. He's more than capable, if not. Kyle tilted his head as if trying to remember other subordinates. There's always Doffy. Doffy? The name stirred something faint in Crocodile's mind, then hit him like lightning. He froze. Doffy? Doflamingo? Joker? Don Quixote. Doflamingo, entrenched at the heart of the underworld, feared even by the Marines, arrogant to the core, one of the 10 Yasha. Crocodile's eyes widened and his jaw dropped. The cigar clenched in his fingers slipped and thudded onto the deck. His lips trembled. No words would come. What? He managed at last. Doflamingo is one of your men. 191. Never has such a rich battle been fought. Crocodile's roar rolled over the little skiff and scattered a handful of startled seagulls into the gray sky. Kyle stared back at him as if the world had suddenly been rearranged, casually picking at his ear and yawning. Ah, yes, he said without any urgency, as if confirming something obvious. The sound that escaped Crocodile was neither laugh nor curse, so much as a baffled gurgle. His mind had short-circuited. Don Quixote Doflamingo, one of the worst men he knew, was a subordinate of this person? Doflamingo, himself, the world's greatest swordsman. Myhawk, Moonlight Mariah. Layer upon layer of powerful names slid into place, sketching the outline of an immense, suffocating underground empire. And the emperor of that empire was lying right in front of him, fussing that his orange juice wasn't cold enough, and musing about kidnapping Marine Admiral candidate Kuzan to use as an ice machine. Absurd. Ridiculous. Crocodile picked up his dropped cigar, relit it, and drew a long, steady drag. Smoke curled across his face, and for the first time in a long while, a hint of resigned calm softened his hard features. So be it. If this was the monster leading them, petty, absurd, and dangerous as he was, then following him didn't look quite so terrible after all. Sky Island. Jiha-ha-ha! Is this Sky Island? What a marvelous place. Moonlight Mariah laughed his eerie, booming laugh as he planted a boot on the pillowy surface of the island cloud. The cloud compressed under his weight, his huge form sinking in a beat before the vapor snapped back and lifted him. He bounced once, delighted, then laughed again. Beside him, Guild Tesoro stood stunned. He craned his neck at the endless sea of clouds, breathed in the air, so different from the salty tang of the blue sea, and felt an unfamiliar light ignite behind his eyes. Gold and riches had been the center of Tesoro's world for as long as he could remember, and he'd seen more wealth than most. But he had never seen anything like this. A sky that seemed to ripple like a treasure too vast to hoard. Is this where Lord Kyle lives? He wondered. Even a place as legendary as this could be reached so easily. Gentlemen, please follow me. A figure descended from the sky on a winged Pegasus, armor gleaming in the bright air. It was Ganfall, the so-called god of Sky Island. He landed lightly and studied Maria and Tesoro with a careful, inquisitive gaze. When he learned they were associates of Lord Kyle, the scrutiny in his eyes softened and a warm, welcoming eagerness took its place. So you're Lord Kyle's men. My apologies for not recognizing you, Ganfall said. An image from decades ago flashed through his mind, a black-haired, gold-eyed youth who had come to Sky Island with the Roger pirates, laughing loud and wild and completely free of care. I wonder how Lord Kyle is doing these days, Ganfall added. He helped us a great deal back then. Lord Kyle's fine, Mariah replied offhandedly. He spends his days sunbathing and sipping juice. Ganfall's smile froze. He hadn't expected that carefree boy to have become the sort of person who would while away his days in quiet retirement. That sounded pleasant enough, a life far removed from the bloodshed of the Blue Sea. What Ganfall didn't know was that the middle-aged, supposedly retired pirate in his imagination was, at that very moment, out in the desert, catching a sand crocodile to complete an illustrated guide. He showed the two men into the shrine and offered them Sky Island's traditional refreshments. After a round of polite small talk, Ganfall's face turned serious. To be honest with you two, the Holy Land is in grave danger. Ganfall's voice was grave as he explained what had been happening over the past few years. A man calling himself God, Eneru, had repeatedly terrorized the island with his so-called God's enforcers, making moves to usurp the divine throne. Moriah barely listened. Another self-proclaimed god was hardly worth his attention. Tesoro, he other hand, hung on every word, picking out the important details like a hunter scenting a trail. So Eneru can control lightning and can hear every sound on Sky Island? Tesoro asked, eyes bright. That's right. Ganfall nodded, worry etched into his face. His mantra has grown enormous. Nothing we do goes unnoticed. And his lightning, it's godlike. We can't stand against it. After they left the shrine, Moriah and Tesoro walked along the cloud path in silence for a moment. Moriah finally muttered, "What do you think, Tesoro? I'm too lazy to bother thinking about it myself, but this mission hinges on you." Lord Kyle's briefing left out a few things, Tesoro said, his gaze sharpening. Eneru isn't quite as unbeatable as they made him sound. His mantra reaches very far, yes, but it's not terribly precise. It sweeps broadly across the island, but it doesn't always pinpoint targets accurately. His lightning's power is tremendous, but it still can't freely change form or move at the speed of light, Moriah said. So he's only a half-finished product? Moriah asked, intrigued. You could say that, Tesoro replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. That's exactly our opportunity. An opportunity to maximize our profits, Moriah finished with a grin. They didn't rush into action. Following Tesoro's plan, the two waited and watched, using Moriah's shadow clones to gather detailed intelligence across Sky Island while secretly monitoring Eneru and his god's enforcers. They even went a step further, covertly helping Eneru in ways the public never noticed, speeding up his conquest of the Holy Land. For example, Moriah's shadows slipped in at night and quietly dismantled the traps Ganfall's subordinates had set. Tesoro, for his part, spent a little gold to bribe a corrupt god's enforcer under Eneru and purchased the details of Eneru's next assault. Villagers and soldiers alike were bewildered. Who brought devils into our village? Ganfall cried, unable to see the invisible hand pushing the conflict along. Under the two of them, the situation in the Holy Land rapidly worsened. Eneru's god's enforcers swept forward like falling dominoes, crushing resistance, while Ganfall's god's army retreated step by step, steadily losing ground. The Holy Land was on the verge of collapse and panic had spread through the island. Then Moriah and Tesoro finally acted. Moriah stood perfectly still. His shadow peeled away from him and became a swarm of bats that descended on Eneru's forces, cutting down hundreds of God's soldiers in an instant. Tesoro merely raised a hand and a massive, indestructible wall of gold sprang up, halting the God's enforcers' relentless onslaught. The display of power from the two of them was enough to kindle hope in Ganfall and the people of Sky Island. That night, Ganfall sought them out again. He approached with a deference that bordered on awe. "Sirs," he said, "please help us drive Eneru off." Tesoro let out a theatrical sigh and put on the air of a man reluctantly weighing a request. "Lord Ganfall," he said, "it's not that we don't want to help. We came here under Lord Kyle's orders to study the customs and culture of Sky Island. If we get into a direct clash with this god, it would delay Lord Kyle's important business." He made a pointed emphasis that tied mission to clash. Ganfall's expression changed. He understood the implication at once. Their assistance wouldn't be free. A flicker of hesitation crossed his eyes, but it quickly gave way to a resolute determination to protect his homeland. "Gentlemen," Ganfall bowed sharply, "if you can drive Eneru away and defend the Holy Land, we will give you all the gold of the legendary Golden City, Shandora." Tesoro's lips curved into a knowing smile, though Ganfall did not see it. The next morning the sky was clear, the sea of clouds roiling beneath. A colossal arc, large enough to blot out the sun, lumbered forward and finally hovered above the Holy Land, casting a vast shadow. Eneru stood at the bow, his elongated url, obus swaying, his expression unbearably arrogant as he looked down at the islanders gathered with weapons. Contempt twisted his features. "Yahaha, false god Ganfall! Today is your end!" he boomed. "Relinquish your divine throne and kneel before me." The panicked look Eneru expected from Ganfall never appeared. The crowd split, and two figures stepped forward. One was unnaturally tall, his face oddly pale and devilish. The other wore a suit, gold ornaments flashing brilliantly in the sunlight. Eneru blinked for a moment, then turned his face to them with that familiar, contemptuous smile. "Oh, Is the false god too cowardly to show himself? Did he send 2 clowns from the blue sea to die in his stead? He lazily extended a single finger, aiming it at Mariah and Tesoro from across the clearing. You two, kneel and receive the grace of God. I might consider letting you die quickly. Veins stood out along Mariah's forehead as he fought to control his anger. A harsh, repressed laugh escaped him. Gee-ah! I've not seen such arrogance in a long time. If Kyle didn't want him alive, I'd stuff you into my shadow box this instant. Eneru's patronizing smirk and the way he treated human lives as trivial immediately set Tesoro's teeth on edge. The man's self-importance, the way he pretended to hold everyone's fate in his hands, felt no different from the odious celestial dragons. A cold disgust curled through him. He lifted a hand slowly, voice low and cutting. God? You're calling yourself God? At the last word, the sky answered. Boom! Above them, through the blanket of clouds, a column of golden light erupted, a relentless, brilliant torrent pouring down from the heavens. A torrent of molten gold gathered in the air, coalescing into a colossal wave that blotted out the sun. With an unstoppable, terrifying momentum, it came crashing down toward Eneru on the ark. Tesoro stood before the golden breaker, drinking in the surge of power as his gold fruit resonated with the endless metal. A warrior's exhilaration swelled in his chest. He threw his arms wide and laughed, the sound rolling across the clouds. I, Tesoro, have never fought a richer battle. Chapter 192, God Falls. Eneru's long earlobes twitched, and for the first time the smug, godlike sneer he always wore cracked. Gold? Endless gold? Yaha! Mere metal dares to be insolent before a god, he roared. He laughed crazily, lifted his right hand high, and pressed his index and middle fingers together, aiming at the golden tide that blotted out the sky. 100 million volts. Discharge! Blinding lightning poured from his fingertips, coalescing into a thick spear that struck dead center of the towering golden wave. Eneru expected the metal to melt, the wave to collapse. Nothing of the sort happened. The furious bolt was instantly swallowed, absorbed, and conducted by the vast mass of gold, as if a single spark had been plunged into an ocean. The golden swell only hesitated for a heartbeat, then surged forward with even greater ferocity. Eneru's pupils snapped tight. Conductivity. He had overlooked the most basic property of a metal. Gold conducted electricity. He was about to summon his subordinates to counterattack when a strange, characteristic laugh sounded from behind him. Kishishish, little brat, you don't face only one opponent. Gecko Moriah's body began to contort and stretch with that strange, high-pitched laughter, sinking into the ever-expanding shadow at his feet. In the next instant, a terrifying demon god, nearly 100 meters tall and formed entirely of darkness, rose up from the ground. 2 horns jutted from its head and its bulk was immense, yet its face was an exact copy of Mariah's. The creature's colossal silhouette swallowed the sanctuary, and a suffocating weight of oppression rolled over everyone below. The hope that had just begun to stir among the residents was snuffed out in an instant by that malignant aura. Ganfall, sir, this man, a member of the God Squad choked out, voice trembling, face gone white. He doesn't look like a good person. Cold sweat beaded on Ganfall's brow. How could he have summoned someone who seemed even darker than Eneru? Mariah, however, paid no heed to the fear of the ants beneath him. The shadow demon god he had become needed only to think. Shadows Asgard, whoosh, across the cloud deck of Sky Island, countless black shadows unfurled like living things, snaking outward and tangling themselves around every one of Eneru's priests and divine soldiers on the ark and on the billowing clouds. Those warriors, who a moment before had been brimming with confidence, were dragged into the darkness without so much as a scream. In an instant they were gone, as if they had never existed. With a single strike, Eneru's painstakingly assembled priest corps was wiped out. The once arrogant invader was reduced to a lone figure standing at the bow of the ark. Eneru, isolated. The people of the sanctuary first went stone silent, then erupted into thunderous cheers. The situation had turned on a dime. Eneru's face drained of color. He had no time to brood over the loss of his followers. A golden tide of death was already bearing down on him. Bastard! He roared, his body snapping into a streak of lightning as he barely slipped aside and avoided the impact of the gigantic golden wave. Rumble! The ark was struck squarely by the golden tidal wave. It was effortlessly swallowed and absorbed by that vast mass of gold, folded into the surge until it disappeared. Tesoro stood on the clouds, making a deliberate sweeping gesture with one hand. The golden tide behind him bulged and reshaped itself, finally coalescing into a towering golden colossus, roughly the size of Mariah's shadow demon god. "Do you see, Eneru?" Tesoro called. His voice, amplified by the resonant giant, rolled across the cloudscape with an intoxicating mix of triumph and confidence. "Before absolute wealth, even a god who floats above is nothing but a joke." "You're asking for death," Eneru snapped, fury cracking through him. His body blurred into a dozen after-images as countless bolts of lightning converged on the golden giant from every direction. "Lightning! Forge the gold!" Tesoro answered with a low, savage roar. Intricate patterns flared across the giant's gilded surface, drinking in the lightning and channeling it down through the clouds beneath its feet into the endless white sea. For a moment the cloud ocean below flashed and boiled with thunder and light, a magnificent, terrifying spectacle. "It's useless," Tesoro said coldly. "Your lightning will only become the best fuel for my gold smelting." Eneru's eyes narrowed. In an instant he was above the golden giant's head. 200 million volts, Rygo, he cried. He poured every ounce of his electrical power into the attack, becoming a titanic Rygo of pure lightning. A crackling trident formed in his hands as he drove it down toward the giant's crown, one of his most devastating forms. But just as the Rygo was about to strike, the golden giant's surface melted. The metal ran and twisted into a vast, churning vortex that swallowed Eneru whole. "Gold splash!" Tesoro clapped his hands together with savage delight. Trapped inside the living gold, Eneru felt pressure surge from every side. The molten metal flowed around him like a hungry thing, probing, trying to seep through and pierce his body. "Never!" he roared. The Rygo within him detonated. Lightning tore outward in a blinding explosion, ripping the giant's upper body apart. Molten gold and shards of gilded armor sprayed in all directions. When the storm cleared, Eneru had reformed in midair, panting and pale. He looked down at the man below and, for the first time, felt a real unease. Tesoro gazed up at the fragments of gold scattered across the sky, breathing hard, but the corners of his mouth twitched into a faint smile. Gold could only blunt the lightning's force. It couldn't stop it completely. If he hadn't had Shandora's gold reserves on his side, resisting Eneru would have been much harder. Even so, the fragments didn't simply fall. They broke into a fine golden dust, almost invisible, and rode the air currents until the whole battlefield was tinged with it. The fight was only beginning. What followed quickly became a pure contest of strength and technique. Eneru exploited the extreme mobility granted by the rumble fruit, flashing through the air and striking from every direction. Each reappearance was heralded by a devastating bolt. 30 million volts, Thunderbird. 30 million volts, Thunder Beast. 60 million volts, Thunder Dragon. Colossal creatures of lightning screamed into being and charged at Tesoro. He, however, met every surge and every change with the same cool, unchanging method. Calm, measured, and inexorably precise. The gold beneath Tesoro's feet rose like a fountain that would never stop, pouring up from the city and instantly forming shields, walls, and weapons. From the cloud line, 1,000 razor-bright golden chains whipped out to snare Eneru, but he slipped through them every time with blinding, lightning-fast motions. The fight tore itself across the sky, from the sanctuary down into the cloud sea and back up to Sky Island, each clash sending shards of gold flying. Energy from Eneru's attacks cleaved the metal into glittering dust that hung in the air like a metallic mist. Eneru's mantra tracked the ebb and flow of the battlefield, but it lacked the precision to pick out those fine particles as they blended into the storm. With every inhalation he drew in more of that dust, more of his own potential undoing, tiny slivers of metal settling in his lungs, in his throat. The duel dragged on for hours. Eneru's reserves were bleeding away. Tesoro, backed by the whole golden city, seemed inexhaustible. "Damn it," Eneru breathed, tasting iron. He couldn't afford to prolong this any longer. His features set, his eyes hard as thunder. There was only one option left. He summoned every scrap of strength he had and prepared to unleash his ultimate technique. He shot up to the top of the clouds, spread his arms, and drew every thundercloud on Sky Island into himself. The sky went black in an instant. A colossal, spherical thundercloud, pitch black, and humming with power, hovered over the sanctuary. The sheer force it radiated made everyone below tremble to their very cores. "That is Rhaego," Ganfall croaked, his voice breaking. "He's going to destroy the whole island." Eneru's voice, cold and absolute like divine judgment, rolled across the sky. "Under the ultimate divine punishment, you will turn to dust." Tesoro stared up at the black thunderball capable of annihilating an island. His expression hardened. He knew he had one last chance. "Grand Tesoro!" he cried. He called every last gram of gold to him, shaping it into a magnificent, intricately detailed colossal model of a city that hovered above his head, the strongest defense he could muster. Just as Eneru was about to unleash Rhaego, Tesoro let go of Grand Tesoro. The giant golden replica dropped toward the ground to stand between the sanctuary and the storm. At the same time, Tesoro launched himself upward at full speed, charging straight for Eneru. Eneru blinked in surprise, then a cruel smile spread across his face. "Seeking death," he sneered. Eneru didn't hesitate. He redirected a powerful bolt of lightning and sent it straight at the charging Tesoro. Tesoro didn't dodge. The bolt punched through his left shoulder, blood splattering across half his body. Pain tore a muffled groan from him, but his eyes shone with a fierce light. Now, at that exact moment, Tesoro lunged forward and clamped one hand around Eneru's arm. "Got you," he said, a grin splitting his blood-streaked face. He gave a low roar and activated the trap he'd prepared. Eneru began to sneer at what he thought was a foolhardy move, but his body went rigid. A brutal, indescribable pain ripped through his lungs, his heart, every limb. He looked down in horror and saw tiny flecks of gold seeping under his skin. The gold dust he had inhaled earlier condensed and crystallized at Tesoro's command, hardening beneath his flesh and locking his body from the inside. You bastard! I told you, you don't deserve to be a god." Tesoro bit back a curse as a white-hot pain lanced through his shoulder. He held Eneru's arm fast with one hand, and with the other he made a fist, channeling the last of his strength into a single concentrated strike. "Turn into a real god statue for me!" He screamed. His fist crashed into Eneru's chest. From it erupted a torrent of liquid gold that poured over Eneru, flowing and hardening as it went. The metal wove and molded itself around him until, suspended in midair, a towering statue of pure gold stood in place of the man, dozens of meters tall, frozen in Eneru's unmistakable God's fear stance. Tesoro released his grip. He had no strength left. His body gave out and he fell from the sky. Behind him, the massive black thunderball Rhaego, now bereft of control, slowly unraveled and dissipated. The clouds thinned and light returned to the sky. 193. Boss Direct Hiring. Kyle's private villa on the Saboti archipelago was bathed in afternoon light. Sunbeams poured through the giant floor-to-ceiling windows, painting bright patches across the polished floor. The air carried a faint tang of wine and the clean, comforting aroma of Robin's freshly brewed black tea. Still, despite the pleasant surroundings, the living room hummed with a thin, barely concealed tension. "Everyone, meet Crocodile and Tesoro." Kyle lounged on the main sofa, casual as ever, and nodded toward the two men seated before him. "From now on, you're partners." The words, offhand as they sounded, made Crocodile's shoulders go rigid. He swept his cold gaze over the people gathered in the room. Beneath Kyle, the world's greatest swordsman, Dracule Hawkeye Myhawk, sat with his supreme-grade blade Yoru across his knees, absently polishing it with a white cloth. Everything around him seemed incidental. Yet his presence was like a masterpiece inlaid into the air, a silent force that could not be ignored. Opposite Mihawk, the underworld's nightmare, Gecko Moria, let out his signature kishishishi chuckle, eyes flicking over the newcomers as if sizing up how to exploit them. The room watched, waiting to see how two new names would fit into a balance already heavy with power. Standing beside Kyle was a man called Karen, dressed like a butler, calm, composed, and deliberately unassuming. He didn't look particularly imposing, but Crocodile knew better than to underestimate an old retainer. Beside Karen stood Tesoro, the showy young man wrapped in bandages. Power thrummed around him like a coiled spring. Crocodile noticed his cigar had been tucked away in his pocket. Between the people in the room and the tension in the air, lighting up felt almost obscene. The concentration of dangerous people here was staggering. Each one could raise storms across the Grand Line on their own, and they were all gathered because of that lazy fish slouched on the sofa, Kyle. Beneath the surface of the gathering, too, lurked the 10 Yasha do Flamingo, another sleeping force to be reckoned with. Crocodile felt his throat go dry. Everything he'd built with Baroque works suddenly seemed small and petty next to this roster. Tesoro watched as well, and he adjusted faster than Crocodile. He had come prepared. His eyes rested on Mahawk for a long, hungry beat. That was raw, unquestionable strength. From Mariah, whom he dealt with moments before, Tesoro read treachery and shadow. From Karen, he saw discipline and control. And the one who had drawn all these pieces together was Kyle. This organization could change the balance of the world. The realization sent a fresh flare of ambition through Tesoro, a heat that tightened his smile. "Welcome, both of you," Karen said first. The sound of his voice was level. His metallic jaw moved slightly as he inclined his head toward them, neither servile nor arrogant. Mariah grinned, a low chuckle slipping out. "Kishi shishi. 2 more interesting fellows have come along." Mihawk looked up, gave a brief nod of acknowledgement, then went back to running his hand along the black blade resting in his lap. Robin set down a tea tray and poured a cup of dark tea for Crocodile and another for Tesoro, a faint smile playing across her face as a quiet gesture of welcome. The calm, almost domestic ease of the scene made Crocodile more uncomfortable than any show of force would have. He had expected a display of dominance, or at least an interrogation sharpened with pressure. Instead, it was as if 2 new coworkers had been introduced, and everyone around the table merely returned polite greetings. Kyle must have seen the tension on Crocodile's face. He pushed himself up from the sofa. "Little Sand," he said casually, "you look like you've just been pulled out of Impel Down." He eyed Crocodile's wounds. "You haven't healed properly yet, have you? Karen, take him to rest." "He can stay in the villa to the west." Karen nodded. "Yes, Lord Kyle." Crocodile opened his mouth as if to protest, but the words died and turned into a long, complicated sigh. He fell into step behind Karen. From the doorway, he glanced at the equally luxurious detached house not far from the main villa and felt the last scrap of pride he'd carried as a regional lord slip away. Here he might as well be a new hire convalescing from wounds. The others began to drift off as well. Mahawk slung his sword over his shoulder and headed for the backyard dojo. Mariah melted into the shadows with an odd chuckle. Robin settled into a chair and opened a book. Before long, the grand living room had emptied, until only Kyle, Robin, and Tesoro remained. "Tell me about your trip to Sky Island," Kyle said, reclining and making himself comfortable. "Yes, Lord Kyle." Despite the bandages wrapped around him, Tesoro sat up rigid as a board. He spoke clearly and steadily, recounting the mission from start to finish. "When I arrived on Sky Island and made contact with Ganfall, I used the information gap to covertly help Eneru accelerate his conquest of the Holy Land," Tesoro said. That pushed Ganfall to voluntarily hand over control of Shandora. His voice was calm, clinical, no flourish, no bitterness, just a precise recital of facts. "That man named Eneru wields the rumble fruit, but he's arrogant and his mastery of the devil fruit is still developing. I exploited Gold's high conductivity to blunt his lightning as much as possible. During the fight, I atomized Gold into fine particles and dispersed them into the air so he inhaled them without knowing. Then, when he unleashed his strongest attack, Raigo, I took control of him from the inside." He spoke lightly, but Kyle felt the weight of what had been described, the cunning and danger behind it. A soft, wheezy chuckle came from the shadows. Half of Mariah's body slunk into view. He hadn't gone far and had been eavesdropping. "Kishishishi, that kid was utterly outmaneuvered," he remarked, amused. "I brought that fellow who calls himself God," Mariah said. His shadow writhed across the courtyard and uncoiled like a living thing, disgorging a figure bound in sea-stone chains. It was Eneru, gagged with a torn rag, hair and clothes in disarray. The pride that used to mark his face had been washed away, replaced by raw humiliation and fury. His long earlobes sagged, and he glared at Kyle with a fierce, helpless hatred. Tesoro snapped his fingers. A huge shadow fell over the villa from above, and a massive arc, glowing faintly gold, descended to hover silently in the air. Kyle recognized it immediately as Eneru's arc. Prototype of the Arc Maxim, he thought. Given how long this had taken, he figured Doffy would be bringing people any minute now. The vessel looked crude at the moment, but he could see how it would be refined into something dazzling. The amount of gold in Shandora far exceeded expectations, Tesoro said, watching the Ark. With the Ark's capacity, we only managed to bring back roughly a tenth. The rest I asked Gonfall to have guarded. It can be moved at a moment's notice. Kyle let his gaze travel from the floating Ark to the disheveled, struggling Eneru at his feet, then fixed his attention on Tesoro, taking in everything they'd been shown. You did very well, Tesoro. Kyle's approval was plain and unrestrained, and the praise seemed to breathe new life into Tesoro. Even better than I expected, Kyle continued. You didn't just finish the mission, you made it profitable. Getting Ganfall to hand over the gold willingly, that sort of finesse is worth more than brute force. This is all thanks to your guidance, Lord Kyle, Tesoro said, bowing low. Enough of that, Kyle waved a hand. I reward merit and punish faults, that's my rule. So tell me, what do you want as your reward? Gold, you earned it. Power, land, silence fell. Robin looked up from her book and watched Tesoro. After Moriah had taken Eneru away, he reappeared from the shadowed corner, peering out and studying Tesoro with obvious interest. The whole room felt like a test and an opportunity. Tesoro hesitated for a moment. The wounds from his desperate fight with Eneru still throbbed. Then he raised his head slowly. There was no greed in his golden eyes, only an intense, fervent light. Lord Kyle, he said, voice steady and clear, what I seek is not a temporary reward. I want to stand at your side and witness the dawn of a new era. To be able to take part in it, to contribute to your empire, this alone is my greatest honor and reward. When the words faded, the living room fell silent. Moriah's smile slid away, and he stared at Tesoro with a long, appraising look. Robin's eyes softened with approval. She could see it. This young man had potential. They both understood that any material reward would be small compared to the future he was reaching for. Kyle chuckled suddenly. He pushed himself up from the sofa, crossed the room, and helped Tesoro to his feet. Very good answer, he said, patting the younger man's shoulder. The gesture was light, but Tesoro felt a warm current run through him. Then watch closely, Tesoro. Kyle turned to the window. The sun was perfect, and the giant bubbles of the Sabaody archipelago refracted dazzling light across the sky, a picture of calm and peace. Chapter 194. If you don't want me to give it to you. Tesoro's chest rose and fell. The future Kyle had just painted, the grand blueprint to overturn the world, set his blood alight. He was ready to throw everything he had into this high-stakes gamble. Just as Tesoro thought the conversation about his destiny was drawing to a close, Kyle turned around, a difficult-to-read smile playing at his lips. But, Kyle drawled, cutting through the heavy mood that had settled over them, you say you don't want a reward, but I insist on giving one. He gave Tesoro a teasing little wink. That single playful gesture punctured the lofty ambitions Tesoro had only just begun to harbor. For a moment he was bewildered, unable to follow Kyle's train of thought. Kyle ignored his surprise and called toward the door. Come in. Someone was outside the room? Tesoro's mind went instantly active. What could the reward be? Anything personally offered by Lord Kyle would surely be extraordinary. A weapon, something powerful enough to match his skill, or a prominent position that would let him secure a foothold in the team faster. He could only wait and guess as the door opened. A single thought crossed his mind. Could it be a woman? Tesoro's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He'd seen too many superiors parade women as rewards to win loyalty from their subordinates. If Kyle was doing the same, he was about to say he didn't need that kind of reward when a voice from beyond the door struck him like lightning. Tesoro! That voice. He had replayed it through countless desperate nights, traced it in his memory every morning he woke from a nightmare. He'd told himself he'd never hear it again. The sound squeezed his chest, his breath caught. He turned slowly, stiff as a board, inch by inch. At the entrance to the living room, a figure stood. Sunlight poured from behind her, haloing her in warm gold. Golden hair, a familiar face. Eyes that, not long ago, had been stained with tears now shone with joy and longing. She stood there, alive and real. No memory, no illusion. Time seemed to stop. The distant noise, the play of light and shadow in the room, all of it receded until, In his world, only that face he had yearned for day and night remained. Stella looked at him, a single tear sliding down her cheek, and her lips fought to form a smile. In the gentle, familiar voice he loved, she whispered, "Welcome back." Those 4 simple words cracked open every hard shell Tesoro had wrapped himself in. Hatred, ambition, everything. He trembled and stepped forward. The carpet under his feet felt impossibly soft and oddly distant. Each step was like walking on clouds, the world somehow unreal. He closed the distance and reached out slowly. His fingertips shook as they brushed her cheek, warm, undeniably real, not the chill of a corpse or the insubstantial touch of an apparition. "Stella?" he managed, the name squeezed from a dry throat, the same name he'd spoken 1,000 times. She could no longer hold back. Tears streamed down her face, and she nodded, choking out, "It's me, Tesoro. It's me." Tesoro lost all control. The man who had buried a god in gold on Sky Island, the man who could speak with persuasive ease even to Kyle, in that instant became like a child finally returned home after being lost. He pulled Stella into his arms without warning, crushing her to him, as if he could press her into his very bones and never be separated again. For a long moment, he held her like that, trembling. Then everything that had been locked away, years of pain, longing, guilt, and despair, broke free. He wasn't merely crying, he was wailing, a raw, animal sound of grief. For his own helplessness, for the nights filled with hatred, for having finally found a treasure after so long lost. Stella clung to him just as fiercely. She let his tears soak her clothes, and stroked his back over and over, quiet and steady, doing everything she could to soothe him. The living room filled with nothing but his unrestrained sobs and her soft, muffled ones. At some point Kyle had risen. He watched the 2 of them for a moment, then shifted his gaze to Robin. Her eyes were rimmed red. She had turned her face away and said nothing. Kyle gave her a look, but spoke no words. He quietly took her hand and led her toward the stairs. Mariah had slipped into the shadows some time earlier, leaving the reunited pair their privacy. Halfway up the staircase, Robin's voice was barely more than a whisper. "Did you save her?" Kyle paused, leaning against the railing. His voice was very soft when he answered, "Yes, I unexpectedly rescued her back at Mary Geois." "I only meant to give the kid a little surprise after he was done," Kyle said. Robin watched the man downstairs, sobbing like a child in the arms of his beloved, and the sight brought back her own memory of being saved. A warm current flowed through her chest. She turned to look at Kyle's profile and said softly, "You really are a gentle person." "Don't." Kyle waved his hand, brushing it off. "I'm more of a romantic for other people's sake. I just enjoy watching pure love stories unfold." He paused, then added, "Besides, money can't buy something like that." Robin smiled. "True feelings deserve a reward more precious than gold." 195. The Substitute Prince. Over the next few days, a new atmosphere settled over the villa in shambles. Tesoro had changed. The man whose life had once been defined by money and a burning hunger for revenge now carried a gentler air. He was no longer the single-minded climber, obsessed with rank and a fortress made of gold. His eyes held a new light, one of hope and happiness. He and Stella became nearly inseparable. Kyle had generously arranged for them to have the villa next door, giving the 2 of them a little world of their own. More and more often, the others would see Tesoro walking beside Stella in the garden. The man who could once drown gods in gold, now gently pushing a stray branch aside for her. Sometimes they'd find Stella in the kitchen cooking while Tesoro stood by, watching her with a foolish, contented smile. Their quiet, genuine joy spread through the household. Even the usually distant Mihawk, practicing with his sword in the yard, would unconsciously soften his gaze for a moment when he caught sight of the 2 of them leaning on each other. Mariah let out that familiar auntie-like "Gia!" But he didn't interfere. He just watched from a distance. Kyle, the architect of it all, had turned into a hands-off boss. He spent his days either stretched out in the sun or idly sipping black tea Robin brewed for him, lounging like a man who'd retired from worry. That afternoon, Tesoro found him sunbathing. Kyle had traded his gaudy gold suit for simple casual clothes, but he seemed more energetic than ever. "Mr. Kyle?" Tesoro approached and bowed deeply. Kyle didn't even open his eyes. "What is it? Another speech?" he drawled, Save me the sentimental stuff. My ears are getting calloused. Tesoro straightened with a sincere smile. No, Mr. Kyle, I didn't come to give a speech. I came to tell you this. From today on, my life, my abilities, everything Guild Tesoro owns, belongs to you. There was no hesitation in his voice. Before, I chased money and power for revenge, to make sure I never lost anything again. But I've changed. He turned his face toward the soft light bathing the shore. Now I'll use this power to protect. To protect Stella, and to protect everything you've built. Kyle finally opened his eyes. He studied Tesoro. The fire in the young man's gaze had changed completely. It was no longer the annihilating karmic blaze it had been before. Now it was a warm, steady light, an unyielding spark that could illuminate the future. Good resolve, Kyle said, nodding. All right, I know your intentions. Go, spend time with Stella. Don't just stand here and block my son. Yes, Tesoro bowed once more and turned to leave. At that moment, a man in a black suit came running up, a liaison from Mariah's intelligence network. He hurried straight to Kyle and whispered in his ear. Kyle's languor vanished, as if it had never been. He sat bolt upright in the lounge chair, his eyes suddenly sharp. Is the news confirmed? He asked. Absolutely, sir, the man replied. Spandam, head of CP5, personally led the team and is forcibly taking Tom to Eni's lobby, charging him with the unforgivable crime of building a ship for the Pirate King. The mayor of Water 7 pleaded that Mr. Tom's work on the sea train should atone for his past, but Spandam ignored him completely. It sounds like he's determined to have him executed. Damn it, Kyle muttered under his breath. Uncle Tom. The image of the fishman rose unbidden in Kyle's mind, the broad-shouldered shipwright who'd laughed with his whole body, always with a wrench in one hand and a bottle of sake in the other, a companion of the Roger pirates and the builder of the Oro Jackson. Roger and the others had called him Big Brother Tom with affection. Kyle could still taste Tom's treasured sake from nights on the ship, and now Tom was being condemned for building the Oro Jackson. Of course, the whole thing traced back to the Roger pirates. Roger was dead, and Rayleigh and Jabba had retired into seclusion. That meant the mess fell to people like Kyle. A nameless fury swelled in his chest. Those bastards in the world government. Roger had been gone for years, and they still hunted anyone connected to him. Spandam, Kyle guessed, was probably trying to barter Uncle Tom's life for his own promotion. Mr. Kyle, what's wrong? Tesoro asked, sensing the change in the air. Kyle said nothing. He stared out over the sea, his eyes cold. After a long moment, he spoke, voice low and hard. Where are Mariah and Doffy right now? Mariah is consolidating the Shadow Intelligence Network in the first half of the Grand Line, and Mr. Doflamingo should still be in Dressrosa, Kyle said into the receiver, his voice flat and unreadable. Tell them to come to Shambles to see me immediately, he continued. Tell them I have a private job. He rose, brushed the sand from his clothes with an automatic, detached motion, and added, Go to Water 7 and rescue someone. Shambles, Kyle's private villa, held its operations room below ground. One wall was a giant electronic sea chart, the surface alive with dense clusters of red and blue dots that mapped the world government and Kyle's own forces. The room hummed with a cold, clinical energy. Kyle sat at the head of the table, fingers tapping the tabletop in a steady, hollow rhythm. The doors swung open, and two men entered, different in style, but equal in the intimidating presence they brought with them. The first was the grotesquely tall gecko Moriah, his laugh booming and terrible. Jia! Behind him stalked Tenyasha Doflamingo, draped in a shocking pink feathered coat, striding with a theatrical swagger and a cruel smile that never left his face. Mr. Kyle, Doflamingo drawled, voice smooth as silk and just as dangerous, as he sauntered up to the table. Kyle, you summoned us in such a hurry. Is there some big party I missed? Doflamingo dropped into a chair with theatrical ease, one leg thrown over the other. Ever since the Mary Joy's incident, his admiration for Kyle had become almost instinctive. Still, a leopard doesn't change its spots. The swagger that belonged to Tenyasha softened into a performative eagerness whenever Kyle was in the room. Mariah stood to the side, silent as ever. Only the sharp glint in his eyes betrayed that he, too, was waiting for whatever Kyle would say next. This isn't for fun, Kyle said, flat and controlled. He slid a dossier across the table and left it there like an accusation. It's to save an old friend. Doflamingo reached for the papers. Fishman Tom? He read aloud, amusement caught between his words. The world's greatest shipwright, Water 7, condemned by the world government for building the Oro Jackson for Roger, and Spandam, head of CP5, plans to escort him to Eni's lobby for execution as a political trophy. He let the last phrase hang in the air and leaned back, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Kyle's voice quivered with a chill that both men felt. It was the kind of cold you get when something personal is at stake. Spandam's not just after public applause. He's making a statement. If Tom reaches Eni's lobby, they'll kill him for the cameras. We don't have long. Doflamingo tapped a fingertip against the dossier, amusement fading to interest. The shipwright of the Oro Jackson, he repeated. Heavens, the world government is thorough about settling old scores. He glanced up at Kyle, the smile widening into something almost hungry. But, Mr. Kyle, this is an opportunity. Mariah's smile was smaller, more predatory. He stepped closer to the table, scanning the intelligence. Dates, transit routes, a sketch of the escort unit. Spandam's route is predictable, Mariah observed. He'll want maximum visibility. A parade from Water 7 to the docks, transfer to a secure vessel, and then straight to Eni's lobby, all under Marine watch. That's why we can't hit Eni's lobby directly, Kyle said. Too many eyes, too many traps. We have to intercept before they leave Water 7, or disappear him before the transfer. Doflamingo clasped his hands together with theatrical delight. A rescue before the Laos. Nothing like a little chaos on the government's doorstep. He set the papers down with exaggerated care. My networks know the underbelly of Water 7. Dock bosses, shipwright gangs, information brokers. I can pull favors, make it look like an accident, make the escort slip on a grease patch, whatever you want. I'll provide the spectacle. You, Kyle, provide the plan. Kyle studied both men for a long moment. Spandam has CP5 in his pocket. They won't send a simple escort. They'll have elite agents, and they'll use the sight of Tom's arrest to rally public sentiment. If we make a spectacle, it'll be more than we bargained for. Mariah's voice was low, practical. Then we don't make a spectacle. We go surgical, in and out. No witnesses, no fanfare. We use the shipwright's own familiarity with the port. Tom will know shortcuts, hidden slips. If we can get to him before the official transfer, we can extract him quietly. Doflamingo's grin became a slow thing of calculation. Quiet? That's boring, but effective. I can supply discreet transport and a few unmarked muscle teams, a diversion or two, subtle enough to be blamed on pickpockets or drunken sailors. The city will be too busy talking to notice a man slipping away. Kyle nodded. Good, we need to be faster than Spandam's timeline. He'll want a public show, rally the Navy, parade the prisoner, so he'll set the transfer in the earliest daylight. That gives us hours, not days. Silence settled for a moment as each of them imagined the logistics. The dossier between them showed the layout of the police station housing prisoners, the likely route to the docks, the courier manifest for the transport vessel. The map was a set of bones. Now they would need to put flesh on it. Why is Tom important to you? Doflamingo asked, curiosity teasing at the edge of his voice. Kyle's expression didn't change, but his tone did. Softer, older. He once built a ship that saved someone I cared about. It's not just principle, it's personal. Doflamingo's smile softened into something close to respect. Personal reasons make the best missions, he said. They also make the most interesting ones. All right, consider me in. I'll open the lines in Water 7. Mariah, you'll handle the extraction team on the water? Mariah inclined his head once. And the quiet exit. I'll take the fastest route out of the port. No interference, no delays. Kyle tapped the table. The sound was a small, final punctuation. We leave at midnight. Doflamingo, your men will don plain clothes and start feeding misinformation to the docks. Blame it on a rat problem in Warehouse 3. Mariah, you take the Eastern Canal. I'll go with a two-man team to secure Tom from the holding cell. We move fast. We move clean. A moment later, Doflamingo rose, fluid and theatrically pleased. A rescue. On my turf. How delightful. He swept out of the chair as though taking the stage. I'll make the city murmur so low they won't hear a pin drop. Kyle looked at the dossier once more, then at the two men who had agreed to follow him into the teeth of the world government. The chill in his voice hadn't left, but there was a resolve under it now, like a blade honed and ready. Save him, Kyle said simply. They all understood what that meant. Not just the theft of a man, but a deliberate strike against the government's narrative. If they succeeded, they'd deny Spandam his trophy. If they failed, the consequences would be severe. For now, though, it was enough that they were together and moving toward the same dark task. The plans would fall into place or break apart in the coming hours. But in that room, under the low light and the quiet maps, 3 figures prepared to make a decision that could set more than one course in motion. Kyle, you and this shipwright. He's an old friend from Captain Rogers' ship, Kyle cut in. I owe him a few drinks. I won't let him die like that. Doflamingo's expression shifted in an instant. His eyes went hard, as if he just understood the true weight of the matter. This wasn't another routine assignment. It was personal for Kyle. A leader's concerns were never small, and a leader's business was everyone's business. Those Kyle called old friends were not common. Doing this right would buy more favor than 10 ordinary missions. He smiled, a low, deliberate chuckle. So that's how it is, he said, all flippancy gone, as he leaned forward. Tell me what you want, Mr. Kyle. Dealing with Cypher Paul's scum, pulling someone out using dirty tricks, that's my specialty. Mariah's laugh rolled through the room. And if you need a living person swapped for a corpse, my shadows are professionals at that. Kyle nodded, pleased. His lieutenants were troublemakers, but when it came to serious business, they were unexpectedly dependable. Excellent. He rose, crossed to the large sea chart, and jabbed a finger at the mark for Water 7. The plan is simple. We call it Raccoon Dog for the Prince. Kyle tapped the sea chart, tracing a clear route from Water 7 to Eni's lobby. That idiot Spandam will want to show off his prize, so he'll insist on escorting it on the sea train. It's his stage to preen on, and our best opening to move. Doffy, Kyle said, turning to Doflamingo, your job is to create chaos. I don't care how you do it, parasite string, stirring up the gangs, but the moment the sea train pulls out, I want you to set off a huge disturbance on the Water 7 side. Make it big enough to pull most of the CP agents away. Doflamingo licked his lips, eyes glittering. Fu, piece of cake. I'll light up Water 7 tonight, brighter than any fireworks. Kyle looked to Mariah next. Mariah, you're the core of this operation. When the train reaches the designated stretch of track and the chaos is at its peak, use your shadow ability to board the train and swap Tom out. Gee ha ha ha, no problem. Mariah's voice seemed to come from 100 whispered shadows. He paused, then asked, but what about the fake we'll put in his place? Do I need to prepare a decent corpse in advance? No. Kyle shook his head. Doffy, find a death row inmate or a seriously ill man on the black market who's close to dying and similar in build to Tom. Pay him enough to provide for his family. Then Mariah will use his shadow to swap that man with Tom. And after that, Kyle's lips curled into a cold smile. Let the substitute accidentally die on the train. Spandam, wanting his credit, will be sure to announce that Tom was safely escorted and executed. That way the world will consider Tom dead, and he'll be out of the picture for good. The plan was ruthless, precise, and left no loose ends. Doflamingo and Mariah exchanged a look, an unspoken admiration for Kyle's cunning. This man didn't only wield destructive power, his strategic mind was just as chilling. Understood, Mr. Kyle, they replied in unison. Good. Kyle waved a hand. Do it, and remember, I don't want any accidents. I want Uncle Tom to appear before me unharmed. At that, Doflamingo and Mariah turned and left. The operations room fell silent. Kyle leaned back in his chair and stared at the tiny island marked on the sea chart, Water 7. His thoughts drifted to Tom's 2 apprentices, so different from one another. Iceberg, steady, dependable, would one day become the mayor of Water 7. Cuddy Flam, better known as Frankie, had been a wild kid who loved to run around in his underwear and would later end up with the blueprints for Pluton. Uncle Tom had thought long and hard about both boys and had set things in motion for their futures well in advance. Kyle wondered how they were faring now. He sighed. This time he would save Tom, nothing more. He didn't want to meddle with the paths those 2 youths would take. All he could do was pull their respected teacher out of the mire of fate. Several days later, Water 7. The docks were packed, the air taut with tension. Countless shipwrights and citizens had come of their own accord to pay their respects and bid farewell to the beloved Mr. Tom. Spandam, head of CP5, stood proudly at the front of the sea train, a sword at his side, basking in the crowd's attention. Through a den mushi megaphone he thundered, "Look closely, everyone. This is what happens to anyone who builds a ship for the Pirate King. Those who collude with pirates will answer to justice." In the crowd, young Iceberg clenched his fists so hard his nails dug into his palms. Flam, his blue pompadour disheveled and his eyes bloodshot, stared at Tom, bound in chains, and cried, "Mr. Tom! Teacher!" Tom met his apprentice's eyes and gave them a relieved, defiant smile. "Iceberg, Flam, hold your heads high. A man must believe in the ships he builds." Flam couldn't hold it back any longer and began to sob. Impatient, Spandam waved his hand. "Move out!" The sea train blew a long, mournful whistle and slowly started to pull away. Just as everyone's spirits hit bottom, the city was rocked by a sudden change. From the far side came a deafening roar. Flames shot into the sky, thick smoke billowed up, and explosions detonated one after another. "What's going on?" Spandam barked, stunned. "Report now." "Sir, it's a series of massive explosions at the junkyard in the back alley," a CP agent blurted out of breath. "Looks like a gang war. Heavy weapons are being used." "Idiots," Spandam snarled, stamping his foot. "A bunch of idiots. Leave half the men here. The rest of you, come with me. We'll suppress the riot." He couldn't let his show be spoiled by a few thoughtless gangs. A large number of CP agents hurried off with Spandam, and the dock's defenses suddenly felt much thinner. Iceberg and Flam exchanged a quick, uneasy look, both of them registering the same thought. The timing of those explosions was far too convenient. The sea train picked up speed, gaining momentum as it raced along the rails over open water. Inside the carriage, only a handful of guards remained, and Tom, still locked inside his iron cage. The train moved out into a stretch of sea with no islands in sight. Then the lights in the carriage flickered. One of the guards yawned and rubbed his eyes. At the edge of his vision, the shadow beneath his feet seemed to twist and stretch, lengthening unnaturally in the dim light. The darkness slithered like a living thing, creeping under the iron cage until it had wrapped around Tom completely. The whole thing took less than half a second. When the shadow receded, Tom was still sitting there, as if nothing at all had happened. Only his eyes looked oddly dull and hollow. No one seemed to notice. The train pressed on toward Eni's lobby. Chapter 196, Reunion with Old Friends. Inside Kyle's private villa on Shambles, he lounged on the sofa with a newspaper in hand. The front page screamed about the Water 7 riot and a shocking headline, "Pirate King Shipwright Dies Suddenly During Transport." The article went on. A massive gang war had broken out in Water 7, stretching CP5 thin, while escorting the notorious shipwright Tom. Lax supervision allegedly led to the prisoner falling ill and dying in custody. CP5 Officer Spandam had been severely reprimanded by his superiors for the incident. Kyle skimmed the piece and smirked. "He must be having a priceless expression right now," he said. Doflamingo appeared in the doorway, chuckling as he swaggered in and casually tossed his pink feather coat onto the sofa. His triumph turned into a blunder. "Pathetic," he sneered. Behind him loomed Mariah, his tall form blocking most of the light from the entrance. "Where is he?" Kyle asked. Mariah snapped his fingers. The shadow behind him writhed and then spilled forth a massive figure, the fishman shipwright, Tom. Uncle Tom staggered forward, still dazed and disoriented from whatever he'd just endured. A moment ago he had been locked in an iron cage on the sea train, resigned to whatever death might bring. Then the world bent into a streak of twisted darkness, and a heartbeat later, he was standing in an impossibly luxurious drawing room. Tom's eyes swept the room on instinct. Two figures sat where everyone could see them, Doflamingo and Mariah, pirates notorious enough to fill headlines. The sight sharpened him like cold salt water. "Who are you? Where is this?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Even behind bars, the hardened seafarer in him had never lost its edge. "Uncle Tom, long time no see." The voice came from the sofa, familiar and yet carrying a strange new edge. Tom turned. A young man lounged there with one leg casually crossed over the other, a lazy smile playing on his lips. Black hair, golden eyes, that face. Tom's pupils pinched shut. Memory doors burst open and 100 images rushed him at once. The Oro Jackson, the endless deck, crew members laughing and drinking in the wind. One face stood out among them, the crewman who always seemed to slack off behind Roger and Rayleigh, the one who loafed when others labored, but who, without warning, could become a force of nature in the moments that counted. Recognition hit him like a wave. More than 20 years had passed, and time had made the man harder to read, but those golden eyes and that same cynical tilt to his mouth were exactly as Tom remembered. "Kyle, kid?" Tom's voice trembled with uncertainty. He squinted, as if trying to make the face before him match the one stored in his memory. Kyle laughed and stood from the sofa, a smile softening his features. "Heh, looks like you haven't lost your mind yet, Uncle Tom. By God, it really is you." Tom stared, disbelief written over his face. He took a step forward and, with a loud, affectionate smack, slapped Kyle on the shoulder with his big, broad hand. "How are you here? What was that back there? What just happened?" Kyle nodded toward Doflamingo and Moriah standing nearby. "I had them bring you out. It was just a little trick." Recognition hit Tom. He glanced down at the newspaper lying on the table, read a headline, then understood everything. He threw his head back and laughed, deep, booming laughter that filled the whole living room. "Good for you. Ha! Feels damn good to watch those world government bastards take a hit." When the laughter died, Tom's expression grew complicated. He met Kyle's eyes and let out a long, quiet sigh. "Kyle, kid, thank you. But was it worth it, going to all that trouble for an old man like me? And you made yourself vulnerable." Tom's voice was flat, but there was worry in it. "Vulnerable? No, no." Kyle wagged a finger. "Everyone thinks you're dead. They'll call it another gang war in Water 7 and move on. No one will link it back to me. As for whether it's worth it," he crossed to the liquor cabinet, ooked down a bottle of aged rum and 2 heavy glasses. "You used to buy me drinks back in Water 7. Now that I've got a little means, isn't it right that I treat you, save your life, and pour you something good at the same time?" He filled both glasses to the brim and handed one to Tom. Tom turned the glass, staring into the amber, and for a moment his eyes reddened. "Roger," he murmured. "When he left, was he, well?" He hesitated, then added in a lower tone, "Did he go peacefully?" He left with a smile. Kyle clinked his glass against Tom's, tipped his head back, and took a long swallow. Before he left, he said one line that turned the whole world on its head, very much his kind of thing. Tom drank deep as well. The burn of the rum seemed to spark old memories. When he set the glass down, he asked quietly, "And Rayleigh? What about Crocus and the others? Is everyone all right?" "Rayleigh's on shambles, working as a coating craftsman and living comfortably. Crocus is at Twin Capes with Laboon and Brooke. Jabba ended up finding himself a giant wife in Elbaf. Everyone's carved out their own lives," Kyle said. That's good. Tom breathed, the weight on his chest finally easing. He looked from Kyle to Doflamingo and Moriah beside him and found himself exclaiming, "I never imagined that lazy kid who used to tag along with Roger would become such an important person. You even have Shichibukai running errands for you." "Just getting by," Kyle answered modestly. Doflamingo and Moriah listened from the side, barely holding back smiles. Taking down a gorosei and turning the Holy Land Mary Geoise upside down hardly sounded like just getting by. Kyle's humble bragging had truly reached another level. "Oh, right," Tom said, remembering something. His eyes lit up. "The Oro Jackson. What happened to that ship in the end? For a shipwright, a masterpiece you pour your heart into is like a child." "Want to know?" Kyle asked with a sly smile. "Go have a drink with Rayleigh and let him tell you himself. I promise, the fate of that ship lives up to its legend." He didn't mention that the Oro Jackson was hidden. He preferred to let the old friends trade stories on their own. After a moment, he glanced at the mixture of regret and relief on Uncle Tom's face and changed the subject. "Uncle Tom, I did save you, but I'm not running a charity." Kyle rubbed his hands together and gave a shrewd, merchant's grin. "I have a job, and I'd like to ask a favor of the world's best shipwright." "Ha ha ha! As long as there's wine and ships to build, everything's negotiable." Tom banged his chest with a laugh. Kyle returned the gesture of a polite please, then turned and walked toward a concealed door tucked deep in the villa. "Come with me. I guarantee that once you see this, you'll forget all about the Oro Jackson." Tom didn't know why, but curiosity won out. He lifted his wine glass and followed. When Kyle opened the hidden door, a long stairway descended into darkness, and a sharp tang of oil and heated metal drifted up. Tom felt his heart speed up for no obvious reason. As a master shipwright, he had a kind of primal instinct for scents, and that smell told him one thing: something enormous was hiding down there. 197. Ark Renovation Plan. Tom followed Kyle down the long stone stairwell until it opened into a cavernous underground space, and then he stopped, dumbfounded. Before him lay an unimaginably vast dry dock, hollowed out on the scale of several football fields, with a domed ceiling studded with countless luminous stones that lit the chamber as if it were broad daylight. Around the edges, banks of heavy machinery and precision instruments, some familiar to Tom, some not, were arranged with clinical neatness. Dominating the center of the dock hovered an enormous ship. It was an ark unlike any Tom had ever seen, strange in design yet suffused with an air of sanctity and grandeur. It floated silently in midair, its hull flanked by huge gilded wings and several pairs of oars that jutted from the sides. Complex propulsion assemblies bristled at the stern, and a towering statue of a goddess crowned the bow, lending the whole vessel a ceremonial, almost reverent aspect. Tom almost dropped the wine glass he was holding. He stood there with his mouth agape. A lifetime spent as a shipwright had taught him to read a vessel's language, and he could feel, acutely, the technology and power locked inside this ark. It wasn't driven by currents or sails, and there was no steam engine humming inside. It simply hung in the air, refusing to obey any known rule of physics, as if it were its own little world. "Is that flying?" Tom's voice wavered, not from fear, but from pure excitement. "That's right." Kyle stood beside him, grinning like a kid who just shown off a new toy. "Half finished, though. It barely stays up thanks to a jet dial, and the power system's still unresolved. I snagged it from some guy who claimed he was a god. Best part, it's hideous." "Flying ark," Tom breathed, then hurried to the hull's underside. He ran his rough hands over the cold, smooth surface as if he were touching someone precious. His eyes shone. "Incredible. The design is unbelievable. That thruster layout, never seen anything like it. It's insane. Subarashi." Like a child with a treasured present, Tom circled the ark, tapping and peering at every detail, his amazement bubbling over. Kyle didn't interrupt. He simply watched, amused. For a master shipwright like Tom, a single great ship, one that was ahead of its time, was more intoxicating than any fine wine or glittering treasure. He lingered over the lines and fittings as if spellbound, reluctant to look away. Finally, he could contain himself no longer. He ran to Kyle, eyes bright, and blurted, "Kyle, why did you bring me here?" Kyle's smile faded into something more serious. "The reason is simple." He leveled a steady look at Tom. "Uncle Tom, I want you to turn this into the strongest, fastest, most durable ship in the world." He pointed at the ark, an unmistakable hockey aura radiating from him as he spoke. "Power, weaponry, armor, endurance, I want the best in every respect. Money won't be an issue. Materials won't be an issue. Manpower won't be an issue. I'll give you full authority, the finest team, and every resource you need." Kyle spread his arms as if embracing the entire dry dock. "I want you to build me an ultimate weapon, a ship that can overturn the world and carry all of my ambitions." Tom's chest tightened. To surpass the Oro Jackson, the thought hit him like lightning. The Oro Jackson was the pride of his life, the legendary vessel that had borne the Pirate King's dream. The very idea of outdoing it stirred something fierce and irresistible in him. Kyle was offering him the chance to build a legend. What does a shipwright dream of his whole life? To use his own hands to craft a vessel that history remembers and future generations praise. "Ha!" Tom threw his head back and laughed, the sound booming with pride and ferocity. "Kyle, kid, you know how to give an old man something to do." He thumped his chest like a drum. "Leave it to me. I, Tom, swear by my name as the world's #1 shipwright. I'll make a ship that even the gods will tremble to see." A satisfied smile spread across Kyle's face. He could see Tom's enthusiasm had been completely reignited. "That's exactly what I hoped," he said, then grew thoughtful and stroked his chin. "But there's a small problem with the design." "What problem?" Tom asked at once, already slipping into work mode. Kyle explained, "The concept is brilliant, but many of the parts are crude and impractical. And the power system, it's unstable." "Power system?" Tom's eyes sharpened. You said it's electrically driven. Is the issue the generator? Not enough output, or a low conversion efficiency? He rattled off technical questions like a man who'd spent a lifetime solving them. None of those. Kyle's expression shifted, a little odd. Its power source is a living being. He's temperamental. Sometimes he even goes on strike. A living being? Tom was stunned. A living creature used as a generator? What kind of story was this? Arabian Nights? Wait, Kyle clapped his hands. The original owner of the ship is the generator, and he's here right now. I haven't decided what to do with him. Want to meet him? A mischievous grin spread across Kyle's face. He thought it would be entertaining to let Uncle Tom, the practical, no-nonsense shipwright, meet Eneru, that fellow who kept raving about being a god. It would likely spark quite the reaction. All right, I want to see what sort of creature could power a ship this big. Tom's curiosity was fully caught. Kyle led him through the vast dry dock, deeper into the facility toward a more secluded section. The guards grew noticeably sterner, and the air seemed to weigh heavier. At last they stopped before a cell constructed entirely of sea stone. Through a small peephole they could see into the cell. A man with long, pendulous earlobes was chained to the wall, heavy links of the same iron blackening his wrists, and his head was bowed. At the sound of the commotion outside, he slowly lifted his face. It was an unbearable air of arrogance, eyes alight with contempt, barely contained fury, and an unmistakable, naked intent to kill. You lowly mortals! Eneru's voice was hoarse, but it still carried that imperious, condescending ring. How dare you imprison me, a god? When I am free, I will unleash endless lightning and reduce this tiny island of yours and your filthy souls with it to scorched earth. 198 Cami. The cell resounded with a wild, angry scream. Eneru thrashed and ranted as if he weren't a prisoner behind seastone bars, but a god passing judgment on mere mortals. Uncle Tom watched him with a mix of curiosity and wariness. Kyle, he asked, peering through the bars, is this the generator you told me about? He couldn't quite hide his unease. This man was clearly unhinged. What if he ruined Tom's precious arc? Yes, Kyle replied with a curt nod. At that moment, Tesoro appeared in the passageway, still bandaged but looking much better than before. He bowed first to Kyle, then glanced at Eneru in the cell. A shadow of shame crossed his face. My Lord Kyle, he said, apologetic. I'm sorry, his mouth is still foul. I couldn't fully subdue him back on Sky Island. Eneru's eyes flashed with renewed fury when he saw Tesoro. You golden flash bastard, he spat. How dare you ambush me with such despicable tricks? If you hadn't shoved those filthy metals into my body, I would have turned you to dust with a single strike. All right, enough, Kyle said, rubbing his ear in irritation. He gestured to Tesoro. Take off his chains. Both Tesoro and Tom were stunned by the unexpected order. Lord Kyle, this... Tesoro stammered. Even though he's weak now, he's still a rumble fruit user. If you remove the sea stone, he'll be dangerous again. Open it. Kyle's voice brooked no argument. Yes. Tesoro didn't understand Kyle's reasoning, but he obeyed at once. He went to the cell, fitted the key into the heavy sea stone door, and unfastened the chains binding Eneru. With a metallic clang, the shackles hit the floor. As soon as the restraints fell away, Eneru felt the force that had been suppressing him vanish. His devil fruit power surged back through him like a dam bursting. Pale blue arcs of electricity danced over his skin, popping and crackling with a fine, static sound. Foolish, utterly foolish mortals. His face contorted into a cruel, fanatical smile. You have sealed your own fate. Now feel the wrath of God. He laughed, mad with triumph, and prepared to condense himself into a bolt of lightning to blast out of the cell. Then, in an instant, the smile froze. His body would not transform. Although his abilities had returned, his body felt as if it were filled with lead, utterly unable to move. What was happening? Before he could piece it together, a pressure descended from the sky that defied description. It wrapped around him and filled him instantly. It wasn't a physical weight. It was an absolute compulsion, a force that reached for the soul and crushed the will. Conqueror's Haki. But this was nothing like the Hao Shoku he had heard about. Those were like mountain torrents, violent, overwhelming, but with edges you could trace. This Haki was the universe itself, an abyssal, endless nothingness. Eneru felt his consciousness being wrenched free from his body and drawn into a boundless darkness. At the end of that void, he saw a figure, colossal, beyond words. It seemed fashioned from cosmic stardust, and at its center burned a pair of golden eyes, brighter than the sun and more fathomless than a black hole. In those eyes, Eneru witnessed the birth and death of stars, the ceaseless currents and stillness of time, the turning wheel of life and death. It was an absolute presence that exceeded understanding and imagination. There was no murderous glare, no open hostility, only a quiet, steady look. And that calmness was worse than any roar. It reduced Eneru to something smaller than a speck of dust. His vaunted title of God, the omnipotence he boasted, came with the rumble fruit. All of it suddenly seemed like a child's toy next to that indifferent gaze, pathetic and ridiculous. So this is what a god really is. All his posturing, all his bluster, it had been a colossal joke. He wasn't a deity, he was a pitiful worm. He had lucked into a little power and convinced himself he could rule everything, the frog at the bottom of a well. Thud. Back in the real world, his legs failed him. He sank to his knees, cold sweat slicking his skin, trembling so violently he gasped like a fish thrown ashore. Every trace of arrogance, rage, and contempt drained from his face, replaced by stunned disbelief that nearly folded him in half. Slowly, almost deliberately, Kyle withdrew the Conqueror's hockey that had been fixed on Eneru. The crushing pressure that had filled the cell evaporated. Tesoro and Tom stared, bewildered. Neither had seen what Kyle had done, only felt the echo of a terrifying presence pass through them. The so-called god who had been all arrogance a moment before was now on his knees, limp as a fallen hound. Is this the power of Lord Kyle? To subdue an enemy without striking a blow. He hadn't lifted a finger, and yet he'd utterly shattered a powerful devil fruit user's mind. Tesoro's awe of Kyle climbed to a new peak. He remembered his own desperate, strategy-filled struggle against Eneru on Sky Island, how he'd barely scraped a victory, and here was Kyle, who needed only a single look. The difference wasn't just vast, it felt like two beings from different dimensions. Eneru trembled on his knees for a long time before slowly lifting his head. The expression he fixed on Kyle had changed completely. It was no longer the glare of an enemy or the begrudging respect for a strong opponent. It was the rapt, worshipful gaze of a believer looking up at his one true God, fanatic, devout, and almost joyous. Like a lost traveler who'd finally sighted a guiding lighthouse, Eneru crawled forward with all his strength until he reached Kyle's feet. He trembled, reaching out as if to touch Kyle's shoe, then froze, as though any contact would desecrate the god he kept in his heart. He bowed and slammed his forehead against the cold floor. God. A hoarse syllable squeezed from his parched throat. 199. Fanatic? Eneru's voice was no longer the arrogant, hoarse edge it had held before. It trembled with an almost ecstatic reverence, like a pilgrim who had wandered a desert for decades and at death's door finally witnessed a miracle. He fell to his knees and prostrated himself at Kyle's feet, his whole body shaking with a feverish excitement. I was wrong. How could I have been so presumptuous in the presence of a true god? He cried. I, a fraud who stole the name of God, dared to challenge your divinity. He looked up, tears streaming down his face, a relieved, crazed smile twisted across his features. Please, punish me with your divine lightning. Reduce me to ash. To die by the hand of a true god is the greatest honor a sinner like me could receive. As he spoke, he pounded his forehead against the ground in frantic self-abasement, the dull thud of each blow punctuating his words, as if only that could release the storm of feeling inside him. Silence hung in the air. Kyle stood frozen, stunned. Tesoro's jaw nearly hit the floor. Uncle Tom, wineglass in hand, simply forgot to raise it to his lips. The three of them, 6 eyes fixed on him, just stared, dumbfounded, as Eneru laughed, wept, and prostrated himself on the floor. Kyle's head felt like it was full of 10,000 stampeding alpacas. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. In his mind, there had been a script. The captured would be terrified, begging for mercy on their knees. I was wrong. I'll never do it again. And Kyle, magnanimous, would spare him on the condition that he served dutifully as his power source. Simple, practical, no drama. Instead, Eneru had turned into a raving zealot, a masochistic believer who actively demanded divine punishment. Kyle wanted a reliable generator, not a new religion. His mouth twitched, his temples throbbed. He would rather go up against the Gorosei again than deal with this. Get up first. Kyle said, trying to find his voice and order the situation. No, Eneru barked back, refusing even to sit up and pounding his forehead harder against the floor. The sinner Eneru has no right to rise before receiving the true God's forgiveness. Kyle let out a long breath, feeling his blood pressure spike. Kyle shot a look at Tesoro, who was just as frozen, and through that glare he was saying plainly, "You started this mess. Fix it." Tesoro snapped back to himself, then stared at Eneru in disbelief. He still remembered the godlike arrogance Eneru had displayed back on Sky Island. How could one look from Lord Kyle have reduced him to this? Tesoro forced himself forward and cleared his throat. "Ahem, Eneru. Lord Kyle told you to get up, so get up. Don't make a fool of yourself here." Eneru turned his head slowly, regarding Tesoro with a mixture of contempt, pity, and superiority. "Shut up, mortal," he spat. "What do you know? Someone ignorant enough not to understand the glory of a god has no right to lecture me. You only soil the world with your filthy gold." Tesoro went blank. What did I do to deserve that? I was trying to help, and he's insulting me. Before the two of them could erupt into another argument, Kyle finally lost his patience. "Shut up!" Kyle's low bark snapped through the air. Eneru fell silent at once, burying his face in the dirt and trembling as if he were a scolded pet waiting for its master's punishment. Kyle rubbed his throbbing forehead and sighed. None of his subordinates were easy to handle. He decided to end it rather than escalate. All right, I won't punish you. I forgive you. Now get up." Eneru's whole body shook. Slowly he lifted his head, tears of disbelief in his eyes. Really? Great Lord God, you're really willing to forgive someone like me? A pseudo-god who doesn't deserve it? Really? Kyle nodded, expression flat. But my patience is limited. I'll count to 3. Yes, I'll get up right now. Eneru scrambled to his feet and stood at attention, hands at his sides, head bowed so he didn't dare meet Kyle's eyes. The obsequious posture was a complete reversal of High's earlier arrogance. "From today on," Kyle said, pointing at him, "you'll live here. Your only job is to work with Uncle Tom to supply power to the Ark. Do it well, and you'll be rewarded." "Yes, Lord God, your will is my everything." Eneru straightened, chest puffed out, and cried his devotion at the top of his lungs. His face shone with self-satisfied reverence. "I will give all my lightning to make your vessel a divine light that cuts through darkness and judges all evil." Kyle's expression went cold. He stared at the fanatic for a long beat, then gave up with a tired shrug. "Forget it. Let it all burn. I'm done with this." He waved a hand weakly. "Uncle Tom, he's yours. Do what you want with him. If he breaks, I take the blame." With that, he turned and left, Tesoro following him with a sympathetic look. At the cell door, only Tom and Eneru remained. Tom watched the man who a moment ago had been shouting for a fight and now had transformed into a rapt believer. He scratched his head and muttered to himself. This world sure was getting stranger. Young people these days really knew how to put on a show. Eneru took a step forward, radiating an arrogance that matched his self-appointed title of Apostle of God. "Hey, old man, you're the shipwright Lord God mentioned, aren't you? Take me to see Lord God's vessel right now. I feel it. It's calling for my lightning." A few days later, Kyle's villa had acquired a bizarre new resident. Eneru followed Kyle like a shadow, never more than a step away and constantly calling him Lord God. His eyes were so fanatical they made people uncomfortable. Karen felt eclipsed. Everyone else in the house was visibly ill at ease. Mihawk chose simply to ignore him. Crocodile wore a look that said, quite plainly, "What the hell is this?" Robin, on the other hand, found the whole thing fascinating. She took out a small notebook and began jotting down Eneru's words and behavior, dryly dubbing it research into the formation and development of new religions. Aside from his devotional reverence toward Kyle, Eneru retained his usual haughty, superior attitude toward everyone else. In his mind, aside from the great Lord God Kyle, the rest were mere mortals basking in divine favor, and he, Eneru, was the closest apostle, elevated above them all. One afternoon he came upon Tesoro, who was having tea with Stella in the garden. Eneru crossed his arms and jabbed a chin in Tesoro's direction. "Hey you, the shiny gold one." Tesoro didn't so much as glance up. He was completely focused on slipping sugar cubes into Stella's black tea. "Spit it out," Tesoro said. Eneru flinched, more annoyed than offended. "How rude to speak to a divine envoy like that," he replied. forcing himself to remain composed. I've come about an important matter concerning the majesty of Lord God. He cleared his throat and struck a solemn pose. Lord God has descended, and this place will be the new divine kingdom. But look at it, it's crude. It doesn't begin to show Lord God's boundless glory. His voice grew excited. So I've decided, I will commission a solid gold statue for Lord God, one worthy of his station, so the whole world can behold his glory. He reached toward Tesoro. Hand over all your ill-gotten gains, every filthy coin and bar. Use that gold as the foundation for the divine statue. This is your one chance to wash away your sins and bathe in divine grace. Tesoro's hand paused mid-motion as he added sugar cubes to his cup. He looked up slowly, a lazy, benevolent smile on his face. Scram. 200. Enel gradually integrates get out, Tesoro said, and the room fell instantly quiet. Stella covered her mouth and stifled a laugh beside him. She clearly enjoyed the exchange. Enel, however, went crimson, pale blue arcs of electricity dancing across his skin. You vulgar mortal reeking of copper. How dare you? How dare you be so disrespectful to the main god's messenger? This is blasphemy against the main god. He trembled with rage, his fingers shaking as he jabbed it at Tesoro. Blasphemy? Tesoro set his sugar tongues down slowly, lifted his teacup, and took a measured sip. My gold is the spoils of war. I risked my life to take back from a false god like you. Why would I hand it over for that nonsense? That's not nonsense. It's a sacred duty to proclaim the main god's majesty, Enel bellowed. Someone like you, whose eyes are blinded by money, could never understand the greatness of faith. Tesoro smiled, then put his cup down, his expression hardening. Faith? He echoed coldly. My faith is in Kyle Kidd himself. I'm loyal to him. I work for him. I protect the peace he wants protected. Not like you, playing at dramatic gestures. What you call faith isn't faith at all. It's self-congratulation. You're talking nonsense. Eneru was pierced where it hurt. For a moment he couldn't find a reply. All right, stop being ridiculous in front of me. Tesoro waved him off impatiently. If you want gold, go earn it yourself. Don't bother me. I still have to keep Stella company. Then, as if the harsh words had never been spoken, he turned to Stella with a disarmingly gentle smile. Eneru stood frozen, rage burning in his chest and completely helpless. If he made a scene, he'd be thrown into solitary. If he argued, he would lose. So he could only glare at Tesoro's retreating back, mutter ignorant mortal under his breath, and stalk away in a huff. He decided to go straight to the main god and lodge a complaint. Meanwhile, Kyle Kidd was down in the underground shipyard, inspecting the progress on the Ark's modifications. It had to be said, Uncle Tom really was the world's finest shipwright. In just a few days, he had mastered the Ark's layout and drawn up a detailed modification plan. And Eneru, this generator, turned out to be far more useful than anyone had expected. The electricity he produced was stable, efficient, and seemingly limitless. Uncle Tom even designed a set of transmission and storage modules specifically for him, so the yard's equipment could be run directly from Eneru's output, while any surplus power was banked for later. Kyle Kidd, where did you find such a treasure? Uncle Tom slapped Eneru on the shoulder and laughed. With him on board, this ship's power system can be upgraded by at least 5 levels. Eneru stumbled back from the clap, but his expression was all smug pride, clearly pleased to be recognized. Offering his power to the main god's vessel was the highest honor he could imagine. Just then, Kyle Kidd walked in. Eneru's eyes lit up and he sprinted over, completely forgetting the budding camaraderie with the two shipwrights. Main god, he called, breathless and indignant. I accuse you. He planted his hands on his hips and scowled. That flashy mortal, he actually refused to give any gold for your divine statue. Such disrespect toward you. Send down divine punishment to strike that sinner whose soul has been corrupted by money. Kyle Kidd listened, his temples tightening with a headache. Here we go again, he thought. Did this guy really have an obsession with statues? Enough, Kyle said, rubbing his forehead. Stop bothering Tesoro. His gold is spoils of war. He can do what he wants with it. Eneru deflated like a punctured balloon. His head drooped and his long earlobes went limp. Great God, don't you want a magnificent statue the whole world can admire? He pleaded, sounding small and hopeful. Kyle looked at him and almost refused out of principle. Then an image popped into his head. A huge, pure gold statue of himself, standing in the villa courtyard. Not bad, he admitted inwardly. He cleared his throat, tamped down a grin, and adopted a dignified expression. Since you're so earnest. Eneru's eyes lit up instantly, full of expectation. All right, Kyle said, pretending to relent. But no more harassing Tesoro. If you want gold, you'll have to trade for it. He pointed toward the large pieces of equipment humming and spinning at full speed nearby. Your job is simple. Be a reliable power source. Work with Uncle Tom and get this ship retrofitted for me. If you do it well and don't disappoint. Kyle Kidd paused, a wicked smile tugging at his lips. I'll pay for the materials for the divine statue. Really, main god? Eneru could hardly believe his ears. The good news hit him like a bolt of lightning. I never lie. Yes, main god, I understand. Eneru practically exploded with energy. He darted over to Tom, thumped his own chest, and vowed, Don't worry, old man. From now on, I'll give you a constant, round-the-clock power supply. I'll work day and night and channel my lightning into every bolt and screw here. We have to finish modifying the main god's vessel as fast as possible. Uncle Tom blinked at Eneru's sudden fervor, then laughed aloud. Good kid, full of spirit. All right then, let's get the keel reinforcement finished today. Watching the old man and the young techie throw themselves into work with such gusto, Kyle Kidd nodded in satisfaction. Over the following days, Eneru turned into a complete workaholic. Eneru spent almost all his time in the underground shipyard, a tireless, self-sustaining engine of power, constantly pumping out electricity. With him working full bore, the Ark's refit moved forward at a breathtaking pace. Uncle Tom, thriving on the momentum, watched one wild idea after another become reality, backed by almost limitless energy and resources. Beyond the daily grind of high-intensity labor, Eneru treated the project like an artist at a canvas. He kept reworking the designs for the main god statue in his head and on paper, first a realistic rendering, then an abstract interpretation, and now something approaching myth. Each revision grew more outrageous and more magnificent than the last. Kyle Kidd would drift past the plans from time to time, chuckling at their excess. In one version, the statue held the sun in its left hand and the moon in its right, while it stood astride a colossal dragon made of lightning. In another, 18 pairs of wings fanned out from its back, each pair symbolizing a different natural catastrophe. The newest blueprint was even more preposterous than all the others. The statue's backdrop was an image of a collapsing galaxy, impossibly grand. Kyle Kidd thought to himself that if he kept designing like this, even all the gold in the world wouldn't be enough. The treasure from a single island would be meaningless. Still, when he saw how serious Eneru was, he didn't try to talk him out of it.